Oh, hi, everybody.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, it took a while for us to get everything put together, but look at this panel. Is this amazing?
Blame Captain Al. We
have 50 listeners, now 40 viewers, 30 20.
10. Retard.
Is this amazing? Oops.
Captain Al.
That's me, I'm sorry.
We have 50 listeners.
Hang on.
Viewers,
30.
I'm getting a little bit of deja vu.
Where's it coming from?
That was entirely down to me with my audio.
Was that you?
Set up, yeah.
No, I think it's me, actually. Okay. Sorry, guys.
Well, whoever it is, he needs a jolly good spanking.
Yeah. Please. Sorry. So, should I do it again?
APG does S&M.
Spank me harder.
And then spank me.
All right.
Why do I feel like I'm always in a Monty Python sketch whenever I'm in the chat room or with you guys?
Well, it's the closest thing you can get nowadays.
All right. I'm not sure how I'm going to introduce everybody, but we'll just wing it. Everybody knows you. Who cares?
Exactly right.
Yeah. All right. All right. I think it's going to be time for me to hit the record button.
I think you should be introduced with Mad Dogs and Englishmen since you fly Mad Dogs.
Yeah, I should, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm not going to play any sound clips for introductions today. Yes, because it just wouldn't be fair because we have so many people here that don't have any sound clips to play.
I'm sure we could sing some.
That's not a good
I've
idea.
I've got plenty of rugby songs for Captain Al.
What?
Okay.
There was an old sergeant who sat on a rock.
Oh, no.
No, I was thinking the sexual life of a camel.
Oh, I think I've made a terrible error.
It was a good run whilst it was going strong, wasn't it?
It was a lot of fun.
I'm sure Google Hangouts will let you know if anything has been done incorrectly or the standards of taste have been exceeded.
Not sure about that. I don't know.
And you thought copyright issues was the peak of your problems, didn't you?
Exactly. Okay. Let me get to this page here. Airline Pilot Guy, episode 236.
Flight 209, are you clear for takeoff? Roger. LA departing 123.9. Roger.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guide Show, the view from our side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 1804 in the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Dallas, Texas. In this episode, strange item causes a flight evacuation, plane spotters boost airport security, an Emirates 521 update, more news, feedback, and a new Plane Tales episode, Aerodynamics of Death. So get all settled in. Tray tables and seat backs in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 236 is ready for pushback. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, an aviation podcast. I'm Jeff Nielsen, also known as Captain Jeff, a captain for a major U.S. legacy carrier here in the good old U.S. of A. And that's where I am right now, in Dallas, Texas, in my hotel studio, and I have a bunch of folks joining me in their respective studios. And let's start, of course, with our regular co-host, Captain Nick, who is in some kind of a island paradise.
Well, hi there, Jeff. Yeah, it's great to be back on the show, and I am indeed sitting in Barbados, drinking a very pleasant beer from the Caribbean. So just did a quick trip out here this morning. Early start out of Gatwick. Not my favourite place to go from, but, you know, managed it without making too many mistakes. And then across the pond and Here we are, and it's 30 degrees outside, clear and sunny, very pleasant indeed. Just here for a quick stop and then heading home tomorrow.
Hey, so for those who are brand new to the show, first, apologize to them. And second, tell them who you are. I mean, what do you do? You work for a very
I'm some bloke on holiday. I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm a captain with a European long-haul airline flying big Airbuses. So I've taken a couple of hundred passengers out here to enjoy their holidays. And tomorrow I'll be taking a couple of hundred home who have finished their lovely time here on this wonderful island. And they'll be heading back to the UK. Very sad for them, I'm sure.
Yes, that is for sure. Also joining us.
I was just going to say, sorry, Jeff, didn't mean.
Yes,
we seem to have some intruders join us on the show. There's a bunch of riffraff. I hate to mention this, but
I know. I thought we were going to try to keep this link secret, but apparently it leaked out.
It's like you've opened the doors to the homeless. I don't quite understand it.
Well, so let's talk to one of these homeless riffraff people. So we started here in the United States. We bopped over to Barbados, and now we're going to go up to the extreme eastern coast of the United States, the eastern seaboard, with our main man, Micah.
Hello, everyone. So great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And tell us about, for those who don't know who our main man, Micah, is, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm an aviation geek. I would say almost partially an airplane geek because I started listening to podcasts with the airplane geeks, and that's how I found Airline Pilot Guy. I'm a contributor to here. I'm a contributor to the Airplane Geeks and sometimes Plane Talking UK and soon Aviation Extended. And I'm a podcast nut and an airplane enthusiast.
Excellent. And now we're going to bop way back over to the other side of the pond in a community northwest of London, and we have Sir Neville.
Yes. Hello. Good evening. It's 10:15 here, and thanks very much indeed, Jeff, for inviting me on today. And yeah, I'm a non-aviation person. In other words, I'm not qualified to fly anything whatsoever, but I do a lot of flying for work. But my normal job during the day is working for a broadcast and audio-visual company, and we do stuff around the world, which is very enjoyable.
Well, speaking of folks that aren't qualified to fly, we also have Captain Al. Hello, Captain.
What an introduction. A very good evening to you all.
Well, now, wait. Isn't it true, right here at this moment, that you are not qualified to fly a trip?
Absolutely. It's a mere technicality, I hasten to add. Ordinarily, you would find me flying narrow-bodied Airbuses around Europe. But due to a small administrational error, not on my part, I've been sitting it out for the last 45 days or so, enjoying the British summer. So it's now time for me to go back and reunite myself with my airplane of choice, which will be an Airbus A320 or 321, and get back to what I'm supposed to be doing, which is flying it from the left-hand seat. So you join me from Suite 3020 in Birmingham in the West Midlands. All right, my duck?
I thought your airplane of choice was a Piper Cherokee.
Well, yes, it has been over the last few weeks. You're quite right there. I've managed to get my hand back in with some general aviation flying, which has been great fun, I must be honest, and managed to hook up with the Plane Talking UK guys on their home turf.
And you know, that should be his theme song, Jeff. Cherokee People by Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to write that down. Yeah, I've been enjoying your guest appearances on many of the UK podcasts over there, and kind of winging your way all around the country. So
well, yeah, I seem to be following Neville like a bad smell, it would appear.
Yeah.
And actually, when we were at the Plane Talking UK kitchen studio, we did manage to make some bad smells between us.
Yes, you need to watch.
Speak yourself out.
Well, it wasn't the latest episode. It was a couple episodes ago, right? When they were
That's
all
right.
in the kitchen together, and I'm glad I wasn't there. That's all I have to say. I'm probably it's probably necessary for me to play a certain sound effect. Let's just leave it at that. Okay, well, anyway, great to have everybody. This is kind of a last-minute thing. It's very difficult sometimes to try to line up all of the regular co-hosts to do a show, and Captain Nick and I are the only ones available to do a show anytime this week, actually, and so both Captain Nick and I are in the middle of a trip. I am on day 2 of a 3-day, and we thought, what the heck, let's... against our better judgment, let's invite some others to join us as well. So, no, we're just kidding.
And what a foolish mistake that was, as you've already learned.
Let's see. Anything else to talk about before we move on with the coffee fund? Captain Nick?
Don't think so. Nothing new's happened as far as I know. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's talk about the coffee fund.
Johnny, how much more coffee? No thanks.
I love coffee, I love tea, I love the... I don't know. I'm just going to have to leave it at that. I let the thing just go off into the distance because of the problems I've had with copyright issues. So this is going to be an edit point. Let me start off. Maybe I should sing some karaoke, you think?
I think we're going to go a cappella there, Jeff.
I could do that. Unfortunately, if we didn't have the latency, we could all sing a cappella. But
I don't know the tune, but if you hum it, I'll try and catch up.
Yes, you do. Let's see. I'm going to do a little bit of karaoke, so just try to bear with us if you don't mind.
Johnny, how much more coffee? No thanks.
I love coffee, I love tea, I love the Java Jive and it loves me. Coffee and tea and the Java and me. A cup, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup. All right, so the Coffee Fund is your way to support the show financially. And if you have the resources to do so, in other words, you don't have other obligations, financial obligations like rent, food, housing, flying lessons, so many things. But if you have the extra cash to donate to the Airline Pilot Guy show, the Coffee Fund is for you. You can become part of the Coffee Fund cadre, and you can do that by heading over to airlinepilotguy.com/coffee, and there you'll learn about the couple of different ways we have for you to donate to the show. By the way, the donations, unfortunately, are not tax deductible because although I should be a charitable contribution, I am not. And so I have to pay taxes on that. But anyway, last contributor to the Coffee Fund Classic method via PayPal is CB Jet. And another way to do it is via Patreon. Again, all that information is there on the website, airlinepilotguide.com/coffee, where you can learn how you can become part of the cadre. And for all of you who have contributed to the fund in the past, present, and future, thank you so much. And with that, we're going to fade off into the distance and do this.
Stand by for news.
According to Sunport Aviation Police, on Monday at around 5 p.m., a Southwest Flight 2753 stopped in its tracks while taxiing to a runway because a passenger found a 6-inch gold cylindrical device in the seat back pouch in front of her. She immediately reported it to flight staff, and the captain decided to call it in. Quote, a suspicious item was reported on the plane. Our officers responded to the aircraft, said Sunport spokesman Dan Jerome. And I think this was in, was this Houston? Who's Houston? I mean, Sunport. You guys know?
Not a clue.
Let's see. KOB.
That's not Tempe?
Oh, you know what? KOB4 is where this story comes from, and that is Albuquerque, New Mexico. There we go. That's where this whole thing took place, the Albuquerque International Airport. The aircraft was taken to a remote location, so it had zero impact on operations. Everything else continued as normal. Passengers evacuated the plane, and search teams, including a K-9 officer, entered the plane. Everything tested out just fine. The device was actually discovered to be a vibrating Bar 24 golden anti-aging skin roller. Sure. Which is commonly
That's what they
found,
call it these days.
which is commonly found for sale on eBay and Amazon. It's reported to be quite popular in Japan and Taiwan. Sure it is. The anti-wrinkle vibrating device is being held by aviation police, who say they're not really sure what to do with it right now. As a precaution, passengers and their carry-ons were rescreened before getting back on board. When it comes to airport security and safety of the passengers, you're going to err on the side of caution every time, said Jerome. Considering the plane originated in Baltimore, Maryland, and was on its way to Denver, officers could not return the device to its owner.
There is so much material there, none of which is broadcastable, unfortunately.
Well, I was going to say, if the airport police don't know what they're going to do with it or what they should with it, I've got some videos I can send to them that will help them out.
Show them how to use this anti-wrinkle device. Apparently, you hold it up against your skin on your face, and it's supposed to. The frequency is just perfect for vibrating out those wrinkles. So
That's what they say.
that's what they say.
But do you think that we are overreacting with fears over things like this? I mean, as pilots, would you guys see something like that and really call for the plane to be stopped?
I think if I saw this device, I'd say, just somebody put it away and let's just go, you know. But I don't know. Yeah, I think you're right, Micah. We are overreacting quite a bit.
Do we think it was left on board by the previous passengers, or was it actually not being claimed by anybody in particular? What do we
That's
think?
a good question. I think it seems to me, the way they crafted the story, it was somebody was sitting in the seat and probably rummaging through the seat back, whatever, what do you call that?
Seat pocket.
Seat pocket.
Pocket, thank you. And found this device in the seat back pocket and thought, I don't know why, that this was some kind of a bomb or something. I don't know. They thought it was something threatening, apparently. And
So in the United States, at the end of a flight when the passengers disembark, do you do a post-flight security check, or the cabin crew, and go through and check all the seat pockets for left items?
no, because we're a domestic operation. If it was an international operation, yes, but domestically, no.
Okay,
Interesting.
That's the reason why we wouldn't go with something like that, because if something had been found and it was reported to the crew, then they would assume that a security check had not been properly done on the aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas one item's been found, there could be other devices. So you could end up with a pocket full of these things.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that if an area of the aircraft has been missed by the searchers, then there could be more important things, more dangerous things. And of course, now that all the terrorists know that these things are treated lightly, they're probably going to put the next one in on an airplane full of explosives.
Well, luckily, we don't have too many terrorists listening to this show. So
Very true. Very true. I'm just curious to know why it wasn't in someone's bag and why they had it out and during the flight. I mean, did they have lots of wrinkles to get rid of while they were flying?
they may have been meeting somebody special and thinking, I need to take some of the wrinkles out of my
Could
face.
be. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm going to look on eBay actually for one for Mrs. Nev.
Are you saying she has a wrinkly face?
That's a costly statement, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. So we'll go ahead and edit this out, Nev, just in case she listens to it.
Or indeed her lawyer is listening.
I'm looking at it now on Amazon, and it's not a cheap item. It's a $100 item.
Well,
Oh, you can get
absolutely.
them a lot cheaper than that. There are
It's
websites.
Bar 24 gold. Come on. It's just the right frequency of vibrations to relax those muscles in your skin on your face. Okay, let's move on before we get into more trouble.
Damn good idea, Jeff.
Okay. Perched on a ladder with his camera, a scanner tuned to the control tower on the ground beside him, Jean-Charles Hubert doesn't miss much at Montreal's Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport. Every week, rain or shine, the 41-year-old can be found at the airport with his fellow plane spotters, a group of aviation enthusiasts with a passion for photographing aircraft. No, wait a minute. Can we just set this straight right now? Aircraft, singular, is aircraft, and plural, it's aircraft, right? Why are we putting an S at the end of this? Okay, sorry.
Media.
Good question.
Yeah, journalists, quote unquote. Anyway, it's a bit like a drug, says Hubert, wearing a blue ball cap bearing the group's name, the 55th Avenue Spotters, named for one of the roads that runs by the airport. I keep telling myself I'm not going to come, but then I find myself back here. It's very much like the APG syndrome. I keep telling myself I'm not going to listen to that show again. Every time I get back and I listen to a new episode.
Well, we all do. We're all just a bunch of sheeps.
Yes. Anyway, so this is cool. It's a nice article. Liz in Toronto sent this to us, and it's from the CBC.ca, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes so you can read the whole thing. But basically they're saying that the Toronto Airport Authority really appreciate the plane spotters because not only they're providing a security, a layer of security that they wouldn't have otherwise by kind of encouraging them to continue to do their plane spotting. And also some places, and I think here at Toronto, here, let me scroll down a little bit more into the article, they have actually organized these groups of folks and even give them uniforms and a special telephone number, etc., for them to call and if they see something that doesn't look quite right. So, and the reason that they're writing this article, and I think the reason why Liz sent this, is that she knows that we have a lot of plane spotters that listen to the show, and also how an airport authority can really make use of this resource to provide that extra layer of security. What do y'all think about this?
I think it's an excellent idea. I mean, at my own local airport at Manchester, they've spent an awful lot of money in providing official sites for aircraft spotters to get really good pictures. So rather than having them sort of clamber over fences and so forth, they've made it very accessible. And they're actively encouraged, or at least the well-behaved ones are, because they are very good at spotting people out of the ordinary who they think probably shouldn't be there. And it does indeed provide an official but valuable level of security for the airport.
Yeah, I think this already exists, Jeff, in the UK, perhaps not as formally as this, but certainly some groups around some major airports in the UK have been recognised by the local security system. And they have an input to it. So Al's exactly right. They're there all the time, and they actually very good at spotting something that's a bit out of the ordinary. So it's a great idea.
Yeah, this article goes on to say that Hubert, the plane spotter, says he and some of the other spotters make a point of calling airport security if they notice anything unusual, such as a hole in the fence line or suspicious human behavior. So that's a good thing. So all of you out there who are plane spotters, you might want to try to organize your effort and your groups, and perhaps contact local airport authorities and see if you can get some kind of a group and a relationship with the airport going, because I think that would be mutually beneficial to both the airports and the groups. So, and speaking of unusual human behavior. This is sent in by Frick. He says, the world has gone nuts. London City Airport flights disrupted by Black Lives Matter protesters blocking the runway. London City Airport was brought to a standstill on Tuesday, which happens to be today, for more than 5 hours after 9 protesters from the Black Lives Matter campaign gained access to the runway. Flights were disrupted since 5:40 a.m. local time when the protesters lay down in the middle of the tarmac. The Metropolitan Police said the protesters had erected a tripod on the runway and locked themselves together. All 9 protesters have been arrested on suspicion of aggravated trespass, being unlawfully airside and breaching London City Airport bylaws, and taken to East London police stations. The activists reportedly managed to get across the Royal Docks to stage a demonstration on the runway. There are suggestions that they used a rubber dinghy, raising concerns about airport security. And it goes on talking about the affiliation of this group with another group that we've talked about before, Plain Stupid. And apparently they were kind of in cahoots with each other and encouraged the group to make this illegal trespass. And I don't know. I think Frick's right. The world is going nuts.
Yeah, I mean, whether you have sympathy or not with this group, and they don't have an issue about airports and about aircraft and about pollution. It's something completely different. But the idea that they feel that the kind of publicity they're going to get by endangering lives on an airfield is kind of good publicity and will help their cause, I think is completely nuts. He's quite right, Frick. So if you're going to do something to generate something newsworthy for a group that deserves to be be on the news, then think of something intelligent. Don't go and sit on the middle of a runway, risk your lives, and more importantly, risk the lives of those innocent passengers and crew who may end up in a serious incident because of your actions.
I think it was a very difficult situation this morning. I was driving, Nick, and yeah, obviously from City Airport, there's mostly shortish haul destinations, most of them less than 3 hours flying time. And of course, the disruption that this causes because of the short sectors with crews and aircraft out of position means that these delays, although it all started at 20 to 6 this morning, will go on well into tomorrow, I would imagine, because of things in the wrong place. So it's a very costly exercise.
And what I mentioned in one of the last stories that, sometimes we overreact. In this situation, I have a feeling that we underreact. This is something where they endangered the lives of people at the airport in terms of planes taking off and landing. They endangered their own lives, which really doesn't matter to me in particular. But when these kinds of protests take place, something like this happened in Boston where they closed down Route 93 and the bridge, people in ambulances died that couldn't get to the hospital. And the people that are doing these things really need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and not just let go with a slap on the wrist, as is often the case.
Absolutely. There are civilized ways to protest and to make your point, and this isn't one of them.
Exactly. And some in the chat room were asking whether it was Black Lives Matter or was it Plain Stupid. And apparently reports have stated that Plain Stupid, a group dedicated to taking direct nonviolent action against aviation expansion, was behind the stunt. The group has expressed, quote, solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement on its official Facebook page. So it sounds like, that they kind of were encouraging or behind this whole organization of the stunt. And I think we'd all take exception with the fact that this is a non-violent action because, as we just mentioned, Micah just mentioned the fact that when something like this happened in Boston, people's lives were lost because of the snarling of traffic and everything else. So,
well, yeah,
absolutely.
I was just going to say, London City is not a conventional airport when it comes to making approaches. They have a very short runway, very steep approach. Pilots have to be specially qualified. Aircraft have to be specifically chosen to go in there. And when you take all those things together, and then all of a sudden, the first pilot in there discovers that there's a bunch of people in the middle of the runway, it's not as easy as you would think to avoid them. This could have been a very serious incident.
Yes.
And also, everybody's diverting, I think, this morning to Southend and Gatwick Airport. So again, those two airports suddenly get overwhelmed with traffic that they just weren't expecting.
Absolutely. And a final sort of element, and it's quite linked to what Micah was saying. A good friend of mine operates an aircraft that is involved with Medivac for organs, for organ transplants, he quite often flies into London City. And there is a reason, because there are quite a number of major hospitals quite close to London City, so it's the nearest airport to get transplant organs. Now, I don't know if he was affected this morning or not, but people will die as a result of these actions if something like that ends up being diverted.
Yeah, these folks need to think of some other way to do their non-violent protests. Okay, and finally, in the news folder here, we have an update on the Emirates 777 flight, Flight 521 at Dubai, not too long ago, that was destroyed in an accident at Dubai while attempting a go-around after a long landing. The aircraft had touched down some 1,100 meters, or 3,600 feet, from the threshold of runway 12 left, after a tailwind on approach started transitioning to a headwind. General Civil Aviation Authority investigators state that as the 777 touched down with its engines at idle power, the crew received an oral warning that the jet had landed long. The crew opted to execute a go-around, and the aircraft became airborne 4 seconds after the warning. Its flaps started to retract to the 20 position, the normal go-around setting, some 4 seconds after that, and the landing gear lever was activated 2 seconds later. Crucially, the inquiry does not mention whether the takeoff go-around switch, the TOGA button we call it, normally used to command go-around thrust from the engines, was activated. But the investigators point out that these switches on the 777 are inhibited once the aircraft's landing gear touches down. In this situation, the crew must manually advance the thrust levers to command go-around power. The inquiry indicates that the Emirates aircraft was still operating with idle thrust and decelerating as it attempted to climb away. It was subject to a headwind and reached a height of about 85 feet before it began to sink down to the runway. Both pilots realized the airspeed was decreasing, and the thrust levers were suddenly pushed from the idle setting to the fully forward position. But the thrust command was too late to arrest the 900 foot per minute sink rate, and the aircraft, pitched 9.5 degrees nose up and traveling at 125 knots, struck the runway with its aft fuselage about 1 second after the engine power began to increase. As the landing gear was still undergoing retraction, the 777 contacted the runway with its Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engines, made in the UK, one of which was detached as the aircraft slid to a halt. The landing gear would normally only be retracted during a go-around once the crew had confirmed that the aircraft had achieved positive climb. Investigators have not disclosed the pilot's communications in this regard, not indicated whether they might have misinterpreted the initial climb away from the runway before retracting the landing gear. The aircraft, which was arising from a city in India that I'm not going to pronounce, was destroyed by fire, but all 282 passengers and 18 crew members escaped. So that is an update on what we suspected had possibly occurred. The fact that they were trying to go around or reject a landing, and we weren't sure why, but now it makes some sense that they initiated the go-around on their own because of the fact that they were landing long. They got the oral warning. Only one minor problem in this whole thing: they didn't actually move the thrust levers forward to initiate the thrust, the go-around thrust, which has me scratching my head.
It's
I've
an
obviously got to
interesting
be.
thing.
Sorry, Nick, after you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jeff, one of the criticisms of the Airbus throttle system was that they're treated very much as switches. In other words, they don't move. And I've heard it many times said that it's a real disadvantage that you can't follow the throttles in their movements as they do on the Boeing, because the throttles all move with what's going on. But this seems to be a classic situation where it didn't actually make any damn difference. The guys probably tried to activate the throttles by hitting the TOGA switches, but then didn't follow them and didn't realize they were moving. So
that's inexplicable. Anybody that flies a Boeing or any other airplane, I mean, if you're wanting to get away from the ground and increase the thrust, whether it be the throttle, what do you call them on your Airbuses?
Thrust levers,
or that's what we call them on Boeings and McDonnell Douglas airplanes.
Because there isn't a butterfly valve to regulate with
I don't
throttles.
understand the whole idea that, well, you just hit the button and then it'll just take care of everything, and not jamming those throttles into the firewall.
Exactly. So it
But,
seems to me that the trick of following your throttles, and the same in the Asiana crash, the guys there had throttles back at idle.
Right. Obviously, they didn't have their hands on the throttle, so they didn't realize
Well,
what was happening.
I don't
But
know
I
if that
think
was
there's
the
a
case.
fundamental overcomplication of something here. I mean, the whole concept of, pressing a button once to achieve, whatever it is, 2,000 feet per minute rate climb, press it twice and it goes around.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness sake, I mean, just a case of move the thrust levers forward is all you need to do on the Airbus. And it goes, right, well, you want to go around, that's fine by me. It just strikes me as taking what is the most logical process for a pilot to do, firewall it, and apply that logic as to what the aeroplane needs to do. Not be pressing buttons once, twice, 3 times a lady, 4 times for luck, 6 for hope.
I didn't recall those actually.
Wow, that's a new training procedure. Gosh.
And it struck me when
the 330.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it struck me that when good old Miami Rick was explaining the logic, I was just sitting there thinking, goodness gracious me, I'm just glad all I've got to do is push the thrust levers forward and the aeroplane knows I'm going around.
But do you think, I remember, Al, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? And I just wonder about the training procedures, and obviously, go-arounds are trained extensively in the simulator, and there is a set down standard operating procedure for it, whether it's a single engine go-around, multiple engine go-around, depending on how many engines your aircraft has, and it should just be straight off the top of your head, shouldn't it, really?
Yes.
Yes. The only one thing I would say is that routinely in the simulator, we tend to practice less than the normal number of engines go around, which obviously tends to, in my case, be single engine go around. It would be the same for Jeff. Nick, you'll probably do 3 engine and 2 engine go arounds on your 340. Should you ever? Could you do a 2 engine go around?
Oh yes, you can. Yeah. Very carefully.
Yes. So long as they're on each wing, I would imagine.
No, you can do it with 2 on 1 wing, but
Okay.
like I say, very carefully.
Very carefully, yeah. But typically, when you're doing, single engine go-arounds, the aeroplane performance is less, so they tend to focus more on that element. And the all-engine go-around is actually quite a frequently messed up event because it's not practiced that often, and sometimes it comes as a bit of a surprise on the line, especially if it's a balk landing. Which is why I actually think that the responses should be instinctive. And that's why I strongly feel that pressing buttons isn't the way to go. Firewall it and let's get out of there.
Yeah.
Just
in my airplane. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
In my airplane, basically, the go-around switches are on the below the knobs of the throttle levers, and so you basically hit the toga buttons with the palm of your hand as you're pushing. It's like one motion. You're just pushing the throttles forward and at the same time hitting the button with the palm of your hand, and that gives you the flight director guidance, etc. And it also, if you have the auto throttles connected, automatically sets the go-around thrust. And then, of course, if you need more, then you just slam the throttles as far as they'll go forward. But interestingly, this is not this, I think, is a problem that a lot of airlines are experiencing most recently, because my last recurrent training, we spent a good 20 to 30 minutes practicing all engine go-arounds. And in fact, my company has actually modified the procedure to ensure that once a go-around is initiated, that the pilot monitoring confirms that the go-around is being initiated properly and the thrust is coming up, etc. So, one of the first things we do is like toga power, confirm go-around, ensure that the auto throttles are on, or set go-around thrust. It's one of the initial things to do before you even start reconfiguring flaps and talking about positive rate and raising the gear.
This is a a stupid question from a non-pilot, and as you know, I have asked a lot of stupid questions, but why are there separate go-around switches from throttles? Why wouldn't it just be throttles forward automatically? What's the purpose of it?
It gives you, when you have the auto thrust system engaged, it gives you a lot of thrust, but it doesn't overboost or completely torch your engines. So it still preserves the integrity of the engine, giving you plenty of thrust to get the airplane flying away from the ground. And it also gives you, if you have the automation hooked up, the automation will fly the go-around procedure, or if you don't have automation hooked up, your flight director command bars will command a pitch setting for you to follow to make sure that you're getting the nose of the airplane up and the airplane's actually climbing away from the ground.
I think also the thing I've noticed as well, certainly I've had about 4 or 5 go-arounds in all the flights I've done, most of them at Heathrow due to the aircraft in front not clearing in time. These go-arounds at the end of a long flight, there's a lot of performance in the aircraft on an all-engine go-around, a heck of a lot. And of course, you've got the circuit height to worry about, you've got vectoring to worry about, so there's an awful lot going on. Plus an enormous amount of power available from 2, 3, or 4 engines, depending on what you've got on board, I guess. So making hasty decisions after the initial go-around must be challenging. And as usual with most things in aviation, it seems that you sort of sit on your hands for the most part, and you don't make decisions too quickly. But the all-engine go-around, there's a lot happening very quickly, I would imagine.
And not to mention the fact that we've seen, as Captain Al is probably likely going to mention, we've had some accidents that killed a lot of people recently because they were initiating a go-around in that same kind of condition that you're talking about, Nev, where you have a lot of power and the airplane's relatively light, and then you start experiencing these, what was it called, summotographic illusion. Yep. So you're right about the fact that you're going to have a lot of power. Go ahead, and Captain Elheim.
What I was going to say is it effectively spins on from what you're saying. One of the things that Airbus have in their arsenal is that you can leave the autopilot in for the go-around. So it's just a case of pushing the thrust levers as far forward as they will go. And if the autopilot was in at the point of go-around, it will remain in and it will fly the go-around for you, which certainly takes a lot of the workload out of what is a busy stage of flight and possibly wasn't expected, hopefully briefed, but maybe not expected. So yes, I mean, it is a high workload situation, but if you use automation in the right way, then you can reduce the likelihood of screwing it up.
I would say,
tackling some questions from the chat room about why the gear went up, because the normal calls are that you need a positive rate of climb, and I think some folks have missed the fact that the aircraft did actually climb away, albeit only to 80 or 90 feet before it ran out of airspeed. So having the throttles up meant it settled back down onto the runway, but the fact is that they pitched the airplane and the airplane started to fly away from the runway, so they would have got a positive rate and they did everything that they would do in the normal cadence, but so positive rate gear up, but then of course they realized they didn't have any thrust, so the airplane was slowing so fast that it was reached a maximum height and then started to settle back down. They just couldn't get the throttles open fast enough, but they I think from the cockpit point of view, other than the fact that they were missing the enormous boost you get up your backside when you open the throttles for a go-around, they did everything in the sort of normal cadence. So I don't think there are any errors there.
Yeah, I think that the error here is just a lack of basics, fundamentals.
Yeah.
The reaction in any airplane, whether it be an Airbus, a Boeing, a McDonnell Douglas, Cessna, whatever it is, if you're going around, you have to make sure that those throttle levers are being pushed up and the engines are actually responding to your command, because without that thrust, you're going to have a big problem.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Destroyed a very expensive airplane.
A bit of paperwork to fill out.
And it's amazing to me that there weren't not any serious injuries or loss of life other than the firefighter at the Dubai airport. Just astonishing. That's a miracle in itself, I think.
Absolutely.
But I suspect there won't be a feature film about this one.
No. Speaking of feature films, we're going to talk about that in a bit in the feedback section. So I think now is a good time to hit this sound effect.
Captain, incoming message.
Okay. Let's start with the first item of feedback in the APG 236 folder, and that is from Paul Baker in Seattle. And he sent this a while back, and I kind of saved it because I know that this is the week in the United States, anyway, when the movie Sully is going to be released. It's this Thursday night at midnight, Friday, technically. And Patrick Smith is the author of Cockpit Confidential, a book written I don't know how long ago, but anyway, the subtitle is Everything You Need to Know About Air Travel. Again, this is by pilot Patrick Smith. Now, Paul Baker starts writing, Captain Smith devotes, and I don't believe that Patrick is a captain. I think he's a first officer, but anyway, for a major legacy carrier. He devotes many chapters addressing familiar questions, concerns, and misinformation from the flying public on everything from Airbus barking sounds to the TSA. I found especially interesting Captain Patrick's take on the miracle on the Hudson, relating to the landing on the Hudson River of an Airbus A320 after takeoff from LaGuardia Airport on January 15, 2009, in which a collision with a flock of Canadian geese knocked out the aircraft's engines. The skill in meeting the incredible challenge of setting down on the Hudson, the aircraft by Captain Sullenberger without the loss of life of any of the 155 passengers aboard made the captain a national hero. I personally hold Captain Sullenberger in high esteem for this amazing feat. Author Patrick Smith, though, takes exception to the word miracle connected with that incident, and while not dismissing it entirely, feels a great deal of luck played a major role that day. Favorable altitude and at the time of the bird strike, that it didn't happen in darkness, good weather conditions, and that there was an abundance of rescue watercraft in the immediate vicinity of the splashdown on the river, not to mention thousands of witnesses. He then goes on to cite some documented incidents where in-flight airliner equipment damage and or malfunction could have resulted in disasters under much less favorable flying conditions than that of the Hudson River incident that were thwarted by the skill of their captains under what the author felt were more challenging circumstances. I'm curious as to what you think about this, Captain Jeff, Captain Nick, Miami Rick, and Dr. Steph, and Captain Al, and Main Man Micah, and Nev from NevTech. He didn't put that in there, but I did. I did find the book a very good read and would recommend it to APGers. Best wishes, Paul Baker in Seattle. Okay, so this movie's coming out. Just to remind everybody, back in 2009, the A320 took off from runway 4 at LaGuardia in New York City, and just shy of 3,000 feet, hit a flock of Canadian geese, which took out a majority of the power of the engines. I think one of them flamed out completely. I believe one of them still had a little bit of power left in it, and he had to make the snap decision whether or not to head over to Teterboro in New Jersey across the Hudson River, try to make it back to LaGuardia Airport, from which he just took off, or looking at the Hudson River directly ahead of him, which choice to make. And he made the decision quickly and decisively and landed in the river, and of course we know the rest of the story.
It really cooked his goose.
I wish you'd warned me. I would have had this rim shot all ready to go.
We can redo it.
There we go. So, I kind of get where Patrick is going with this. I think that most pilots would say, yeah, there was some luck involved in this. I think there was a lot of piloting skill involved in this as well. But this could have happened earlier in that day when there was a solid overcast or undercast where everything was blanketed by a thick cloud layer that you couldn't see anything. That would have been horrible. You would not have seen there's no way you could have landed in the river. You would have had to have made an approach back to LaGuardia or some other airport to try to get the airplane safely on a runway somewhere. But luckily, the weather at the time of this incident was clear, and so he could see everything. So I don't know what I'm very interested to watch this movie this weekend. That will be one of the things on the list of things to do for the weekend, and we'll talk about this on the next episode as far as what our takeaway is about the flick. But I don't know. Anybody have anything to say?
In my mind, Jeff, the miracle is that all those circumstances came together at that time. So that to me is the miracle. Obviously, Sully's flying is without question exceptional. It was a brilliant job he did. But the fact that he was the right height and it was VFR and the river was there and everything worked, for me, that is where the miracle of the husband is. Because on another day, it wouldn't have been a miracle. It would have been a bloody disaster. So, the fact was that it happened at just that perfect moment where he had the opportunity to save everyone's life. So that for me is the miracle.
I think also I'd like to hear a bit more from, because the media always see these things as single pilot operations, don't they? But of course, First Officer Jeff Skiles played a very important part. He's part of the crew. All the CRM worked nicely, and they worked very well as a crew. And you very rarely get to hear about his contribution. So it'll be interesting to see how he's portrayed as well.
Right.
Well, there were a couple of things that I wanted to say about it. One is that the water landing and everything coming together like that is the miracle, not so much the landing. Captain Nick, you did a Plane Tales about an amazing water landing that took place. What was it, in the 50s, over in the Pacific? I can't remember the particular incident. Do you remember which one I'm talking about, where they knew that they lost a couple of engines?
Yes, I do. It was a Constellation, I believe, on its way up to San Francisco Aviation, and he lost 2 engines at the point where he no longer had enough fuel with the increased consumption to make land. So he ditched his aircraft after orbiting for quite a few hours over a picket boat, a U.S. Navy Coast Guard vessel that was put out there in the ocean just in case of this sort of circumstance. And did a fantastic job of it. Ditching an airplane successfully is a really tough thing, and doing it in an open ocean is incredibly hard.
Yeah, and that's not talked about as a miracle because there weren't any cameras there and thousands of witnesses, and we didn't have the media coverage that we have today. And it was an equal miracle. There was also, I think it was ALM Flight 980 back in 1970. That was a DC-9 that ran out of fuel on its way to St. Martin from JFK. And there were 23 fatalities and 40 survivors, but also a miracle that's not particularly talked about. I think the big issue with this and what Sully did and what his the heroics involved in it wasn't so much the flying, but it was the decision, and that making that decision immediately. That was the tough part. That's the situation that if I were a pilot I wouldn't want to be in, and that's why he was the captain, and that's why you guys get paid the big bucks to make those decisions.
It's one of those situations where you almost have to back your own judgment, because there will have been that moment where he thought, the only place I can go is the Hudson, I hope, because you do not want to suddenly discover, with all of the back, sort of office experts, or the backseat drivers, to suddenly discover that actually there were other options. Now, it was fortuitous, if that's the right way of putting it, that there were, no serious injuries, no fatalities. But sometimes when you make these decisions, you have to make them on the only information that you have available to you, and you hope that you are making the right decision. It's the only decision that you feel that you can make at that time, and he made good decisions. If he tried to eke it out to get into Teterboro, we might have been talking about the disaster. So, having the courage of his convictions to go, it's going to have to be the Hudson, even though it was obvious that they had no other options by that point, but still having the bravery to commit to a water landing, it deserves a lot of praise.
Yeah, it's making the decision and then flying what that decision is made, but making the decision early enough so that you have the opportunity to fly.
Yeah.
I think that's the tough part. And from what I understand, the film is more about the NTSB investigation and how that he was finally, it was finally decided that he made the right call, but it really put a lot of pressure on him, and I think that's what the film is about, and I think that's what's going to be interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I hear as well. And the story that, not the story, but the incident that Micah is talking about, he's absolutely right. The ALM Flight 980, a DC-9 flying from Kennedy to St. Martin, and they ended up ditching, and I believe it was the first open water ditching of a commercial jet, and it didn't turn out as well as the Miracle on the Hudson did. And it's a very good book written by Emilio Corsetti III called 35 Miles from Shore, and I'll put a link to the Amazon link to it in the show notes. I can highly recommend it. It's actually a book that I read from the front cover to the back cover. It was very gripping. And
there is also another pilot hero story with regards to ditching an airliner at sea. Unfortunately, it wasn't an entirely satisfactory outcome, and that was the Ethiopian Airlines 767 that was hijacked.
Yeah.
And the captain, despite being continuously set about with, I believe it was a hammer or clubs that the hijackers were using, got very close to pulling off a perfect landing just off the Comores Islands.
Yeah, and we have video of that.
Yeah,
that
and he certainly was a hero because he did everything he could to, under the most extreme of circumstances.
And did anybody survive that?
Yes, they did.
Okay, did the captain make it out alive?
Yes, he did.
Oh, he did? Oh, I didn't realize
He did, yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, so everybody's homework, sometime in the next week or two, go to the movie theater and watch the movie Sully. And I'm looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to comparing notes the next time we all meet together. And,
sounds a good
thank
plan.
You, Paul.
Yeah, nice.
Okay. Let's see. This is from Ernst de Planck. And he gave us a link to a article in the BBC News. Why do people grab their bags after a crash? Now, we had talked about this after the Emirates 5. Well, we talk about it every time there's an accident, don't we? Or they have an emergency evacuation when people grab their bags. And we were talking about the Emirates 521 incident at Dubai and the video of the people grabbing the stuff from the overhead bins and such. And we had talked about an article regarding this, and so we'll put a link to this in the show notes. It's from Daniel and it's from Daniel and Ernst. They sent links to this, and again, the article title is "Why Do People Grab Their Bags After a Plane Crash?" And basically, the answer is because they're idiots.
Because they're 24-karat gold vibrating face massagers in their bag.
No, that's expensive, even on eBay. Okay, Nev, are you okay?
Yeah, I'm just recovering from that moment. Dear me.
By the way, folks, I just want to, here's a, we always do this every episode. For those of you listening to the audio-only podcast, we love you because you are in the majority of folks that listen to the Airline Pilot Guy show. But you owe it to yourself to, at some point, actually be here while we record a show live and be part of the great group of folks that we have in the chat room. And you get to see everybody on video, and you get to see some of the comments that are being made, even by some of our co-hosts in the chat room. Like, for instance, Nev's comments about Captain Al's personal hygiene when it comes to facial hair. So it's very, very amusing, and you really don't want to miss out on this. You really don't.
Yeah, the chat room can get very hairy.
Yes. Like so
Not
many.
just the chat room.
Okay, moving on. Alex writes, spotted pushing into the queue at Heathrow this morning. This is on the 9th of August at 9:45 in the morning. Acme Red, an A330. Wonder who was the pilot. Sat there for 10 minutes as a Qatar A380 and a Jet Airways and others pushed in.
Oh, I have to say, Jeff, Qatar.
Yes, I was
Qatar.
just about. You beat me, Nick. You beat me.
Okay, well, I've heard it pronounced by people
Americans.
even from the airline. No, from this airline, QATAR. I've heard it pronounced Qatar, but okay, Qatar.
And I've always heard the Brits pronounce it Qatar as well. I've always thought it was Qatar.
Oh,
like
no.
Okay, well, that's it. We're shutting this whole show down because I'm not going to stand for this.
It's a revolt.
But you know what? I think
the peasants
Qatar,
are revolting.
You've still not forgiven us for Boston, have you?
I prefer Qatar myself, actually. Sounds like Qatar. But I thought I was mispronouncing it. But so that's usually when I say Qatar or Qatar, I try to give both sides of the story there, so I hopefully don't offend anybody. Anyway, so that Q airline, A380 was and a Jet Airways were pushing in. I thought Heathrow was a Speedbird, a British Airways priority. Things have changed. In all seriousness, my flight was on time, so why did 5 other airplanes push in front as we waited to enter the runway? Why would other planes push in front or get priority? I thought if you lost your slot, you went to the back of the queue. By the way, great show. Well, thank you very much, Alex. And he included a picture from his seat on the starboard side of some twin-engine airplane. Not sure what it is, but out of his window there is a very attractive Virgin Atlantic Airbus. What is that? A 330 or a 380? A 340. 330, I think. So anyway.
Yeah, it's a 330. It's only got 2 engines. It's a 330.
Yeah, I couldn't tell because of the shade, and
and it's been dispatched, so it's not a 787.
Oh boy, Rick, where are you? All right. So, what do you say about that, Captain Nick?
Well, you'd have to ask air traffic, but generally speaking, they have a system, and it's not based on who gets to the end of the runway first. They try and block airplanes so that you don't end up with too much of a mix of weight categories, which require an inefficient amount of time. So those aircraft who are in a lightweight category have to wait considerable time if they're getting airborne behind a heavy or a super weight category aircraft, so the weight turbulence can dissipate. So they try and block a bunch of little airplanes together, then they'll kind of let a few heavies go together. And also, of course, it depends on which departure they're on. So they can't clog one particular departure route. And out of Heathrow, there's generally 3 or 4 that are on the go. So they'll try and weave people in. So you've got one going off to the south, one going off to the west, one going off to the north, and rather than trying to get a bunch of airplanes off onto the same departure route where they would obviously not have a lot of separation. And the guy there down at Swanwick who's trying to cope with all these airplanes wouldn't suddenly get swamped. So there is a logic.
The catcher, as they're known.
Say again?
Because the catcher, as they're known, because the tower control will send one left, one up the middle, one to the right, and the guy at Swanwick has to catch them, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Brits we're dreadfully good at organising queues. I hate to say it. Whereas in other countries, you might get priority for the airline that's based there, and I think probably the Italians and the French and
Spanish.
Germans are probably pretty good. Spanish are dreadful at that. Their own airlines will always get priority. We are dreadfully honest, and you go in the proper order regardless of what airline you're in, and particularly if you're Speedbird, that bunch of so and so's across the way.
Okay.
I think there was only one circumstance at British airports, particularly at Heathrow, where anybody got any special treatment, and that was Concorde at Heathrow. it had priority for taxiing out, if I remember rightly, Nick.
Yeah, it did, supposedly. And yeah, they just went straight at the front of the queue like a bunch of prima donnas.
Oh boy. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing as you, Nick, regarding the departure routes, where they try to split up different departure paths accordingly, so they can get as many people airborne as quickly as possible.
Yep.
So over in the United States, Jeff, are there any particular airports that favour Acme over and above any of the other US airlines? Is there any sort of nepotism or favouritism that goes on?
Not that I've sensed or experienced myself, no. We always joke around when, somebody's put ahead of us, like Southwest Airlines at Baltimore or American Airlines at Dallas. But I'm sure that said this, the same thing is said about Acme in Atlanta, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of it is not reality. I think a lot of it has to do with the actual, departure routings and heavy versus light airplanes, etc. So, but that doesn't stop us from, complaining about it.
I know one airline that always does very well, and that's because everyone likes to follow the Virgin.
Okay. Ray Davis is in the chat room. I hear that Ray has been experiencing some pains, and we just wanted
everybody
to let.
that's watching the show is experiencing.
Yeah,
some
I'm
pain.
surprised that he was there because we had talked about you, Ray, before we started the show, and we were going to do a shout out to you, and we understand that you're experiencing some pain. And we hope that you get through it quickly and you're back to normal as soon as
Absolutely.
possible.
I hope that the morphine is working well.
And you know what? With morphine, listening and watching the show, it must be much, much more entertaining.
I would have thought so. I'll let
Yes,
you know.
I'm-
I'll give it a go.
I'm getting 5 litres delivered tomorrow, actually.
Okay, well, you'll have to let us know.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Alex, for the question regarding the departure spacing, etc. From First Officer Jeff Felmuth, he sent us a link, and I think a couple others did as well, about this article in Gizmodo regarding...
Jeff celebrated his birthday this week, did he not?
He did? Oh, excellent. He's what, 35 years old?
Again.
Something like that? Yeah. Jeff Felmuth is a great friend and big part of the APG, and so happy birthday belated, Jeff, and thanks for sending this in. He did this a while back, and again, several others did as well. This is an article in Gizmodo, and sorry folks, chemtrail conspiracies are bull hockey. These condensation trails in the sky left by aircraft are common, and most of us wouldn't notice them, but for some they're a mark of a secret, large-scale spraying program by the government. Well, surprise, no such thing exists, or so the CIA wants you to think, at least according to science. Anyway, it goes in and talk about some science conducted at the Carnegie Institution for Science at UC Irvine, which is in Southern California. 77 of the world's leading atmospheric scientists were surveyed on the subject of chemtrails, with all except one, really, saying that they hadn't encountered any evidence of any secret spraying program. And these findings were published in Environmental Research Letters. Anyway, so if you're still one of those who think, I know you guys always joke around about it, but I think that there's something to this chemtrail thing, well, check out this article.
Well, first of all, I think it was the chemtrails that made him write that article because he's been breathing in that stuff.
Okay. Good
But
point.
second of all, on a different note, I became a real airplane nut, a good deal of which because of my father, who always loved to watch airplanes. And when I was a kid and I pointed out the contrails and I asked him what they were, he said to him they were always like a ship's wake in the sky. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to describe it, and very poetic.
Quite accurate as well.
Yeah.
It's just the disturbed air, and well, we've talked about this so many times.
I'm just thinking that one scientist has inadvertently taken delivery of Nev's 5 litres of morphine.
Yeah, I wonder why it was late. That's what it is. That's what happened.
There's always one.
Wow.
Well, Captain Nick, perhaps you would like to read this next one, coming in from Antoine, the Royal Air Force A330 control blockage incident follow-up.
Oh, most certainly, yeah. It's hello, crew. This may be a good news item. There's a link to follow, and we'll take a look at that. You'll probably remember the incident of the RAF captain jamming his side stick with his DSLR camera and causing an in-flight upset. Well, it seems that he's being sent to court-martial. We definitely don't know all the details of the incident, but I can't help to think that it seems a little extreme. And so the A3 tanker pilot heads for court-martial after dangerous dive is the title. And what he did was he had his camera out beside him, and he moved his seat forward using the electric motor and drove the camera into the side stick without realizing it. The aircraft had the autopilot in, and the camera forced the side stick forward, so that tripped the autopilot out and put the aircraft into quite a steep dive, and 24 people were slammed into the ceiling of the aircraft. Now, he's being charged with negligently performing a duty, and I think probably the worst thing is the fact that he's also being charged of perjury and making a false record. So I think if he'd come clean and gone, oh my God, what a dreadful thing, I jammed my camera in, I'm terribly sorry about that, but perhaps we need to take a look at that. He unfortunately tried to cover up his actions, I suspect. This is what we're going to find out about when I guess it goes to court. And the Royal Air Force doesn't take kindly to that. They treat people who are willing to come clean and admit a problem, and this is probably true actually about a lot of areas in aviation. But if you try and hide what you've done and try and sneak away and pretend it wasn't your fault when it really was, then you're probably going to come a cropper, and I suspect that's what will happen here.
Yeah. Absolutely. I've actually seen photographs taken inside the cabin of this aeroplane after the event, and it's not that people sort of gave the ceiling a glancing blow. That they were actually thrown into the ceiling with such force that it's left some serious damage to the ceiling panels. So I'm not surprised that there were some unhappy passengers.
Yeah, I've heard reports that people were screaming and they thought they were dying. They thought they were shot down. Well, it was just very traumatic.
To be fair, that's not unusual in any flight nowadays. Yeah, apparently.
Maybe so with you, Nick. I mean, I tend to get a round of applause. I mean, I don't know if it's out of sympathy or that's charity.
That's because people are so relieved that they've got away with it.
Another miracle.
Yeah, exactly right. We call it Al's miracle every time you land.
You've read my book. There's a film coming out.
Is that Miracle on the Mersey?
Very good.
So apparently the captain's oral report after the event alluded only to a possible fault with the autopilot, according to Aviation Week, which we always in the Air Force used to call Aviation Leak. Yeah, so no, I suspect they'd come down on him fairly hard because he didn't go, oh yeah, I know exactly what's happened here, I'm sorry guys, and trying to hide it.
Very good. Yes, thank you. Jeff, Geoff, probably the proper way to spell my name, writes, there have been numerous accidents where the pilots get disoriented or off course and fly into terrain. American Airlines Flight 965, for instance, got lost on approach to the airport and flew into a mountain in Colombia. There also have been instances where the pilots ignore the GPWS terrain warnings, sometimes going as far as pulling the GPWS circuit breaker. With terrain, airport, and approach databases built into the FMS, why couldn't a modern fly-by-wire airliner prevent CFIT crashes? given that all systems are operating normally, if the approach terrain is not part of the approach, the fly-by-wire system could perform whatever maneuvers would be required to avoid that terrain. Maybe this is already built into modern airliners, and I'm just not aware of it. Who would like to take that one on?
Interesting. The answer, Jeff, is because the GPWS system is not foolproof. And the last thing a crew wants the aircraft to do is automatically pull away and climb into airspace for a false warning. Now, usually when you get the possibility of a false GPWS warning, it's well briefed and it's certain airfields you know about, but that database changes regularly and it is not a foolproof system. It's like a lot of dreadful things that we consider. Getting, for example, a TCAS warning when you're in the middle of a hold is something that just horrifies me, because a TCAS warning is when you get a traffic collision avoidance warning. And if you're in a holding pattern with the aircraft above you and below you and only separated by 1,000 feet, and for some reason you get a TCAS warning, it's telling you to climb, it could climb you into the aircraft above. And you know, it's one of those appalling situations you would end up in, where you would really want to obey a TCAS warning because we're all trained to. You wouldn't perhaps be sure of what's causing it. Perhaps the aircraft below is coming up towards you, or perhaps it's an intruder in the hold. But then again, if you obey it, you're going to be climbing into traffic above you. And the same on a GPWS. If you've got an automatic system that suddenly pitched the airplane away from a false warning into other traffic that might be above you, you could create more problems than you're going to cure. So that's my feeling on that. I don't think it's a good idea. Tell the crew about it and trust that their training will kick in and they will take the appropriate actions. Pilots that disable or ignore GPWS warnings are, generally speaking, fools, and I feel awful for that, but you can't design a system to accommodate every fool that flies.
No. Indeed, and as an add-on to Nick's earlier point, I've actually been in the cruise at flight level 370, and the machine has spouted forth with, you know, terrain, pull up. Now, if it was connected to the autopilot at that point, I really wouldn't want it to be pulling up, thank you very much, at 37,000 feet. There's not a lot of terrain up there, and I'm certainly not going to enjoy the experience as it goes for toga and decides to pitch up to avoid this mountain that's not really there. That just turned out to be a software glitch. It's what they call a spurious warning. So that's a very good reason as to why you wouldn't want it to respond automatically.
Right. Perfect. You know, you see that controlled
and yes,
flight
it woke us up. Yes, it woke us up.
Is used to be the #1 cause of most major accidents, and now it's actually quite a few notches down from the top of the list. Latest top of the list problem is loss of control of the airplane, and so I think that we've made some great strides with awareness of terrain, and we have these great systems as well. But I agree with Captain Nick and Captain Al regarding the fact that we don't want the airplane to just automatically react to something because it could be a spurious warning.
Sorry, Al, after you.
I was going to say, and the kit's got really good. Our newer aircraft have the, I forget what exactly it's described as, but it also has a worldwide obstacle database. So it's not just terrain; it's antennas, it's buildings. So we really have got some very, very sophisticated databases now. I don't know if the Mad Dog has that in it.
Yeah, we do.
Jeff?
The enhanced GPWS, EP. Yes.
Yeah, and then there's the next version on which has all of the obstacles, not just the terrain, but the obstacles. So for antenna and so forth.
I'm pretty sure we have that one as well.
So you have caution obstacle ahead.
No, we don't have that. Okay, I guess we
Okay.
don't. They probably think, well, it's not really worth spending the money on these old airplanes to.
No,
put
I
that
mean,
in.
I was just curious. It's
No, we don't have that.
a really neat addition actually, because
Yeah, that's nice.
it's not just lumps of rock that hurt.
That's true. Yeah, you hit one of those antennas, it's probably going to, do some damage.
Do you think that although the obviously these databases are not error-free, and I accept that, but surely a lot of the obstacles that you are likely to hit, and I realise that there are antennas and this kind of thing, but mountains and things like this. I mean, these things do not tend to move, and you would have thought there could be some universal coordination of databases. Just in the same way you've got your Jefferson charts with date validation on and this kind of thing built into the system.
Well, it kind of exists. I mean, that's it. But I mean, the mapping of the world is not yet 100%. And when you're trying to put the airplane on the ground and there's a bit of climbing terrain just before the runway, the system can interpret that as something you might fly into, and you can generate false GPWS and EGWS warnings. So it has a protection envelope, and sometimes you've got to go through that envelope to get to the runway, and that's where some of these problems occur, as well as there just being straightforward errors in, to err is human, and when these databases are actually put into the software the aircraft uses, the errors can occur there. I mean, we get errors on our Jefferson plates for making approaches all day, every day. They're continually being amended because of errors that creep in, because the people that write the plates, the people that organize our approaches, they do so, and they're human, and they sometimes make mistakes, transpose figures, etc. So that's really more of a problem than anything else.
Absolutely. I'm thinking back a few years back, we had an issue with a terrain database for Venice in Italy, where due to a glitch in the database, there was a 10,000 foot high antenna shown in the database.
Wow.
Which meant that we, whilst the database was live, as it were, so for the 28 days of its validity, we weren't allowed to conduct visual approaches into Venice, because logically where you would make the visual approach would put you into conflict with this supposed 10,000 foot high antenna. It was actually 1,000 foot, but someone had put a couple of an extra zero in, and therefore the database was operating as it felt fit and told you that there was an obstacle ahead, which wasn't actually really there.
And I've seen instances where they'll open up a new runway at an airport, and there's a NOTAM that says when you're using or assigned this runway, make sure that you turn the enhanced ground proximity warning system off, because that information is not in the database, and the system is going to go nuts if it thinks that you're trying to land out there, where the new runway is, because it doesn't know there's a runway there.
Yeah. All those sort of things, they happen quite regularly, Nev. So, and
yeah, interesting. Thank you.
The world's a big place, so there's always a few of these problems.
Yeah. Good question, though. And thank you again for your feedback, Jeff, regarding CFIT in modern airliners. Kevin Stahl writes, I know this ATC text messaging system has been discussed before, but have you or the crew had any experience with it yet? I'm a private pilot, and I rely on hearing the communication between tower and other aircraft for my own situational awareness. I see this being okay for pre-departure clearances, but I would not want to see this replace any important in-air communications. And he has a link to an article from KSL.com. And we kind of discussed it on the last and a couple other episodes. And I agree, Kevin, although I think that in the last show we talked about the fact that many think that this is where this is actually going to go eventually. Perhaps the exception would be operations in terminal areas where immediacy of communication is essential, but I think we're going to find more and more of this digital texting kind of communication taking place in the future.
For sure, Jeff. But I see other ways of improving situational awareness that will complement it. So we already have ADS, ADSC. Am I right, Al? I'm trying to think the one where we see all the other aircraft around us with similar systems showing their height, their speed, their call signs, etc. We have great situational awareness nowadays with all the other aircraft with these systems on board, which this will just complement. So instead of having to use your mind and listen to a radio call to try and work somewhere and work out where someone is, you'll have them physically there on a screen showing you where they are. So these things shouldn't ever happen in isolation. They should be part of a complex system of improving situational awareness, and this hopefully will just be one element. It won't sort of take something away and not add something on that improves it.
Absolutely. I mean, as it stands at the moment, and I think you are right with ADSC, it's not my subject of expertise, is only really mandated in the oceanic areas as being required, and even then it's not mandatory at the moment in time. So if you're flying over continental Europe, you can still be CPDLC without ADS, so you don't get the situational awareness. But candidly, at the moment, CPDLC is being used for on-the-ground clearances, oceanic clearances, and at high altitude in the airways. So the situational awareness element it isn't being degraded really, because if you're sat in the airways, it's very difficult to know who the other aircraft are and where they are in relation to you just by listening to the radio communications. So and I think it is a positive step in reducing some of the very, very cluttered frequencies that we have in continental Europe.
Interesting. I've heard of ADS-B, but not C. So,
well, C is an additional add-on that gives the controllers what we have set on the your altitude window, your speed window. So when you get given a clearance to change an altitude and you wind in, say flight level 350, and set your autopilot off, the controller gets that figure displayed to him to make sure that you have set the altitude in that he has cleared you to.
Oh, okay.
And the same when you select a speed on the approach, and this is the classic, 160 knots to 4 DME at Heathrow. If you try and cheat and set 165 knots because you or 100, even worse, slower, then he will see the fact that you've misset your speed, and so he can actually either comment on it or cite you if he feels very
Nice. I love all these new systems to get us in more trouble.
Yes, exactly right.
Oh, it's a wonderful world that we fly in these days.
It will be so. If I remember rightly, CPDLC is being used a lot more in the United States for the airway sections. Is that right, Jeff?
I don't believe not yet.
But it's planned
using
to.
it now. I think they're planning on it, but right now
because one of the problems we've had in Europe is that, and it's in fact one of the reasons as to why quite a lot of our aircraft weren't actually retrofitted, is because the ground-based infrastructure can't deal with it's a bandwidth issue, basically can't deal with the volume of data that's coming out of the aircraft. So it'll be interesting to see how that works in the United States, because presently the requirement to be CPDLC equipped over continental Europe has been shoved back a long way, because there are concerns that the technology can't actually deal with the volume of traffic.
Right. Yeah, I've been hearing the same thing, but I'm not sure, how that's going to go forward here. I think it's not happening as fast as they wanted it to here as well. But I think, I honestly think that you all in Europe are moving forward with it faster than we are here in the U.S.
Well, certainly we've got it in London area now, and so we can log in London just getting after getting airborne, and we can use it all the way through. In fact, today we did all the way through till we got it to the end of the area of Barbados. So it's fine, worked beautifully.
All right. Well, there's the future right there. Anders from Stockholm, Sweden writes, been listening to your last podcast while painting my fence. Will take a few to get through the whole fence. White picket fence seemed like a good idea before we built it. Yeah, don't they always? Anyway, I was thinking about the part where you were talking about automation and developing judgment skills and how the first can somewhat disable the development of the latter. I work as a child welfare officer. My decisions do not even come close to having the impact on people's lives as pilots do, your decisions do, but it has a profound impact on a few people. In Sweden, during the last 20 years, we've had a movement where somehow structured approaches always equals quality. Nowadays, it's even written in the law that all government agencies have to work with quality in a structured way. All that seems good and fair, but the problem is that the skill set you need to do the work I do is slowly being replaced. But structured approaches, and far more worse, is that my generation actually thinks that structure always equals quality. I'm a fan of structure, but the problem is it only works with small, clearly defined problems that are the same. And my colleagues with a few years of experience think it works on every situation that arises. And it mostly works up to a point. When the problems you're faced with are more complex, then you will pass that point in my line of work, and then that point you will start to make bad decisions, or none at all, because the structure you have doesn't match the problem. In my line of business, the results are terrible, and thankfully we are slowly working back to giving people experience under guidance of experienced people that will lead to people making good decisions. But the problem is that today, people with experience are hard to come by, at least people with good decision-making skills. So now we have a system where people who themselves are very inexperienced have to teach newbies how to do very complicated jobs and how to deal with situations that they themselves have never encountered. The stage is set with a stage full of actors that are blind, leading the blind, and deaf. I've been fascinated by the reason why structure always seems to be an answer to any problem. All jobs and all facets of life have decisions being made by people. The idea of removing people from that logic is just silly from my point of view, and it shows a complete lack of human understanding. As soon as you put a person into any position, that person will have to make decisions. It can be a big one or a small one, but they will have to make them. So how come we spend so little time teaching people to make good decisions rather than following a checklist? And he puts in parentheses, checklists are, of course, good and need to be used, but it's not all about structure. And now he continues, I remember when learning to skydive. First, we were taught one way of doing things. We got our licenses and started jumping. About a year, I got to go on a so-called base course, B-A-S-E, which was very good, and that taught us things that are not always as simple as it seems. I especially remember one thing. During basic training, we were taught to turn to the right if we found ourselves head-to-head with another skydiver when under a deployed parachute. We were really drilled at this, and we all knew it. During the base course, the instructors suddenly said something a bit different. If you find yourselves head-to-head with someone, turn to the right, unless it's better to not turn to the right. If the other skydiver is far away, has turned her turn to her right, and maybe you have another skydiver to your right, then don't get yourselves into a worse situation than you were by turning to the right. Wow, there are a lot of right turns in there. So, my 5 cents. The world is a complicated place, and structure can solve small, clearly defined problems where the solution is always the same to the same problem. As soon as problems become more complicated, we have to build into the system decision-making and how to learn it and become good at it. Thanks for a great podcast. Take care. Anders from Stockholm. So I think you've kind of come upon a point of weakness in this whole idea of, I know you're not talking specifically about automation, and, well, I guess you are, kind of. That's the way you started the whole thing. But, you know, this idea that someday we're going to have all these automated flying machines out there, and you can only go so far in building in logic for certain things that may happen, all that structure. But when something happens that wasn't anticipated or no one ever dreamed up, or maybe there's a combination of circumstances all coming together that no computer or programmer had ever considered, then you have a major problem. And it's only until you have a human in the equation that can look at the situation, and hopefully who has good decision-making capability to look at the situation, adapt to the situation, and make the appropriate decision for a good outcome. So what do you think about Anders' comments, staff or panel?
I'm going to use my my background in social services and higher education administration and aviation and say, in a very unstructured way, that we already talked about this in our first story.
Mm-hmm.
This is really what we talked about when NTSB did this tremendous investigation of Sully. And because it didn't fit any structures and there wasn't anything to look at, they had to go backwards and see, wait a minute, did he make a good decision? Everybody lived, everybody's fine, there was no problems, but did he make a good decision? Because they had to fit it into the structure that exists. And there's sometimes an intuitive logic that we need to follow that we all have. It's sometimes it's called common sense, and there's very little common sense any longer. And we kind of push that to the side. We make judges who are hired in the legal system or trained in the legal system to make decisions that are based on a specific case. Sometimes we make them follow specific sentences based on exactly what we don't want to do, the sentences that don't apply to the person, but we make them follow it because we're afraid of unstructured events and that we're not being fair to everybody or treating everybody equally. But there aren't always equalities, that people are different, and we treasure these differences, and that's what we need to do, is be able to appreciate differences and work with people based on that.
I think that's a really good point, Micah. And actually, the last sort of paragraph of Anders's feedback there was extremely relevant. And just like in my industry and like yours, guys, our industry is full of what I would call standard operating procedures. And that's a good thing. That gives structure. But do you know what? You can't buy experience, and our industry, and mainly, and also probably others as well, suffers from people being furloughed or being let go, and actually the industry just leaks experience, and that's my main concern. Sometimes in the aviation world, all the sorts of things that you do that aren't trained for in the simulator. Maybe a double engine flame mat. I don't know. Things that just aren't trained, and you have to use your intuition and life experience, and that's pretty important, I think.
The automation can only work to the program that it's been given, and that program relies on a programmer, and therein lies the rub of this whole situation. Not everything has happened previously.
It's true. And so here's a question then. How do you teach decision-making skills?
Ooh.
Well, in some ways, I did some of that in a freshman experience course I used to teach, and what it was doing, the way I did it anyway, was through a system of challenging values. And it was instructive, but it was also controversial because people would come in with their whatever the value happened to be, and we would question them about it, not disparage it, but say why and offer other possibilities and make those people think in terms of what they were doing so that they could come up with decisions and understand why they were making the decisions about their own personal values, and that can get applied to other things.
Very good. Well, Anders, wow, you really asked some really good questions and stated some big problems with decision-making skills and structure, and how we have to make sure that structure is good, and checklists we couldn't live without them, especially in our world, but in many occupations as well. But you still have to use your God-given brain to analyze situations and make the appropriate decisions.
And let me just ask one more question about that, if I can, for a minute. I mean, don't you fly with so many different pilots and first officers and know so many different pilots, aren't there some people that are just natural pilots that, you know, it's within their blood, and it's a very natural thing, and it's a skill that they've learned but they've come up with and understand, whereas there are others that, you know, just fly by the book and it's not quite who they are or what they are?
Well, to be fair, Mike, we really do train to fly by the book for the very reason that you come across people from all sorts of backgrounds. You may not have ever flown with them before. The guy I flew with today, I haven't flown with him for over 5 years. And you have to have a starting point. And you all start from the same point, which is you follow standard procedures. Now, if you get to a point where something has occurred that isn't covered by a standard procedure, then you're going to start to think outside the box, and you'll do it together, but hopefully you'll do it in, I won't say a formal manner, you won't do it in a chaotic manner. You'll consider the options, you'll look at alternatives, you'll rethink a plan, you'll try and figure your way around it until one of you comes up with a solution you think is workable. And even after you started to apply that solution, you'll review your plan, see whether it's working, see if one of you has come up with a better idea, and whether it's time to change your mind. And you'll eventually come to a solution. So we all have to start on the same sort of basic level, basic plane, following a fairly rigid set of rules. Otherwise, you don't know where you are. If you get someone who is a bit of a maverick and just likes to fly his own way, that ain't going to work in our kind of a world. The only time you need to start thinking well outside the box is when something unexpected has happened, and the normal rules don't cover that. And then you do it even then in a slightly formal way. So that, I hope that kind of answers your question a bit.
I think our profession is one of the few where to be average is to be successful. And by that I mean that if you are consistently good at what you do and you don't have those sort of deviations out to the extreme of the envelope, which can result in a few things happening. First of all, you can end up taking your first officer or captain, whoever it happens to be, out of the loop because you're operating at areas that they haven't been to or don't necessarily understand, so you're now operating solo. And secondly, you can end up being so close to the edge of the envelope that you go outside it, and then you're outside of the scope of your own ability. Interesting, I did fly with a cadet pilot a couple of years ago, a very inexperienced guy, but when I flew with him, he showed me all of the right thinking process. He was, from a very inexperienced point, thinking like a captain. And I asked him after a series of flights with him, I said, you really do seem to have, experience in decision making beyond the hours that you have in your logbook. And it so transpired that his dad had been an airline captain, and through many of his teenage years, he'd been on the jump seat, just watching his dad going about decision making, and he just kind of followed in that sort of line, and he was a natural at making good decisions. And it's of no surprise to me that he got his command very quickly because he just had the right approach to making decisions.
Wait a minute, a child watched a parent and actually learned something from it?
I know, it's a strange concept, isn't it?
Wow. That's nice. All right. Well, what a great discussion. I'm glad we have this great panel. Captain Al, Captain Nick, Micah, Neville, thanks again for all of you joining us. And
you're more than welcome.
Now it is time for the best part of the show, which is, of course, Plane Tales.
Yay!
The old pilot's Plane Tales. The aerodynamics of death. It was 1973. A keen and eager air cadet was at a local flying school reveling in the opportunity he had been given. He was well on his way to completing a flying scholarship, which would give him 20 hours of training and put him on the road to his private pilot's license. There was a drama unfolding around Fair Oaks Airfield that morning, and a line of gleaming fire engines and ambulances were lined up on the parade track. A short while ago, a Cessna Centurion, a high-wing, single-engine, six-seater light aircraft, got airborne out of an informal strip in Ireland, bound for Fair Oaks. When the pilot tried to take off, he noticed it was a bit slow to accelerate, but continued with the parking brake on. The wet and slippery grass had allowed the aircraft to accelerate to flying speed, but only just, and the retractable undercarriage clipped the dry stone wall on the boundary. The damage was restricted to the retraction system, but now the main gear, which usually came up, turned and folded back into the fuselage, was now dangling down, useless and waving in the wind. There had been plenty of time to arrange the extra safety services which now attended the little country airfield, and as the damaged aircraft approached, the air cadet and his friends crowded around a radio, listening to the conversation. A senior instructor was giving advice to the pilot on how to lock his gear into position, but to no avail. He was committed to an emergency landing. Everyone watched with bated breath as he approached over the hedge and lined up on the grass strip. A few feet up, he turned off the fuel to the engine. The prop kicked once or twice before it stopped turning. As the drooping wheels touched the grass, they folded neatly back into the fuselage recesses, and with just the nose wheel and flat bottom to rest on, the aircraft settled down safely, sliding to a graceful stop. A smattering of applause was quickly drowned by the sirens of the fire engines as they raced after the aircraft, but there was nothing for them to do. There was little damage and no injuries, so after a few cups of tea, the firemen sloped off back to their slightly more mundane world of domestic fires and cats up trees. Back at the airfield, not much was happening. After all the excitement, everyone had gone back inside out of the dreary weather. It would be a while before the runway was clear for use, but in the club next door, an eager young instructor and his brand new pupil were about to head off for a first lesson, a 30-minute experience flight, in the wood and canvas wonder called a Condor. At the sound of a starting engine, a few of the cadets wandered outside to watch. With the main runway still closed, the radioless Condor taxied out to the only available strip, a short, uphill, crosswind runway that had an awkward line of trees 50 feet off the end and an even higher tree-lined ridge beyond that. The faded windsock flapped a bit, but it was showing mainly a crosswind with a little tailwind. Sadly, the air traffic controller could have told him that a more appropriate runway, adjacent to the accident aircraft, was now available, but without a radio there was no way of contacting him. The controller glanced at the oldest lamp beside him and contemplated what he might have been able to signal had it been working. The instructor started his takeoff, but about halfway down the runway he closed the throttle and stopped. That got people's attention. They watched with more interest as he taxied back for another go, this time putting his flaps down. The little engine revved and he gathered speed. About 2/3 down the runway, the bright yellow machine got airborne, but it certainly wasn't climbing well and seemed to be quite slow. It cleared the first line of trees safely, but the nose came up even further as the ridge approached. The wings started to rock, and then with the horrifying certainty of a disaster unfolding, the left wing dropped rapidly and the aircraft span out of view behind the trees. The crunch and subsequent woof of igniting fuel was clear in the shocked silence that fell over the little audience. A rusty old siren started to whine, and whereas only an hour or two before a line of shiny fire engines had been available, now the usual dirty old red Land Rover, with its 30-gallon foam dispenser chugged into life. Along with a small crowd, the cadets sprinted the few hundred yards that separated them from the flaming wreckage. The aircraft was hardly recognizable, as the canvas had already burned away when the fuel tank burst, covering what remained of the cockpit with flaming aviation fuel. Nobody could get close, and they just watched as the foam did its best to extinguish the fire. A local helicopter had landed close, and the pilot stood nearby with his little hand fire extinguisher and a horrified expression on his face. The irony of what little they could do now, when only an hour or two ago there had been safety services in plenty on hand, escaped no one. When P.J. Barden, the Inspector of Accidents, raised his reports, he decided that
The pilot's use of flap and abnormally low airspeed in order to clear the first obstruction on his flight path placed him in a position such that he had insufficient height, airspeed, or rate of climb to clear the succeeding obstacle. The pilot subsequently attempted an avoiding turn whilst flying with insufficient airspeed. The aircraft stalled and entered an incipient spin to the left at too low an altitude for recovery.
Many years later I relived this experience when I watched a Windjeel, a piston Provis to some, crash in front of me as I taxied him from a sortie. The aircraft had been held off while I led my four-ship of F-18s in for a run and break to the circuit, and once we were on the ground, he recommenced a practice force landing. Finding himself a bit high at low key, he decided to fly an orbit to lose height. Halfway round, he stalled, and, in a heartbeat, the heavy metal tail dragger flipped into a spin and hit the ground. Being the only squadron flight safety officer on hand, I soon found myself crawling through the wreckage, showing the firemen where the dead crew's survival pyrotechnics were likely to be, and smelling the same sickly stench of burning that I knew from Fair Oaks some 15 years earlier. We all contemplated the sad loss of the pilot and his airman passenger with the same feelings of helplessness that we had experienced only a few weeks before when another of these aircraft had been lost in a low-speed turn. A low-level navigation error had put the aircraft into the wrong valley, and the ground rose too steeply for the pilot to climb out. He tried to turn around and escape, but his speed was too low to cope with the turn, and he also span his aircraft into the ground. Some 60% of light aircraft accidents occur during takeoff or landing, many in similar circumstances. But what is it that prevents recovery even for well-trained pilots? For the answer, we must delve into the world of aerodynamics and how a wing stalls. For the wing to develop lift, it needs a strong, smooth, and brisk flow of air traveling over it. We know that it's the curved surface on the top of the wing that accelerates the flow, thereby reducing its pressure, that gives us most of the lift we need to oppose the weight of the aircraft. The more curved the upper surface, the more lift we generate, which is why we change the shape of a wing when we slow down to land by putting down flaps and slats to enhance that curve and compensate for the reduction in speed that we need for a landing. The other thing we do is to increase the angle of the wing in relation to the airflow, so that the air has to make a longer journey up and over the wing, again increasing the lift. However, eventually that very helpful airflow starts to struggle, and when we ask it to do too much, it begins to give up, breaking away from the surface of the wing. The transition from smooth into turbulent flow starts at the trailing edge, and if we continue to raise the nose, increasing the angle of the wing, it moves forward, eventually covering enough of the wing to lose lift. The wing stalls. The fix is relatively simple. Just reduce that wing angle by pitching forward until the airflow adheres again. We can unstall at almost any speed, but the wing will only start to produce useful quantities of lift again when we get the airflow moving fast enough to support the weight of the aircraft. So if we were at low speed, it means accelerating by sacrificing height and increasing engine power. The more engine power we can obtain, the less height we will have to lose in the recovery. Catching a stall early can result in very little height loss. But it's often not a simple stall that kills so many pilots. It's what happens just after. The stalling characteristics of an aircraft can be very benign. The chances are that the trainer that most of us started in was designed with that in mind. They were forgiving aircraft that gave plenty of warning and didn't bite us at a stall. The wings probably had a little twist in them, called washout, that decreases the wing's angle towards the tip so that a stall starts near the wing root, making it more benign and allowing some aileron control. Not every aircraft is like that, not even every trainer. In order to improve performance in some areas, an aircraft's design is often changed in others. It's all a compromise. The battle against drag and fuel consumption, the need for high speed and high cruise levels, the novel, the easy to construct, the just plain stupid, will often result in a design that stalls badly. An impending low-speed stall should signal itself clearly to the pilot, but in some aircraft those warnings may be easy to ignore, may happen too fast or be too unpredictable and happen unevenly. It's likely that one wing will stall before the other, so will drop, increasing the angle of the air going over it and deepening the stall. The other wing will rise, reducing the angle, and it will continue to produce some lift. With the aircraft rolling rapidly, the nose will drop, and any attempt to raise it will exacerbate the situation. The drag on the stalled wing will be higher than the other, causing a yaw in that direction, and the aircraft will start to auto-rotate. The aircraft is in an incipient spin that, if left uncorrected, may well develop into a full spin, whatever is done. If it happens at low altitude, the height for recovery will generally be more than is available, and the result inevitable. So what's my advice? Well, don't just use your aircraft as a means of transport and only go from A to B. If you get to your destination with a bit of extra fuel, why not practice a few circuits and remind yourself how to do those odd approaches that you might get after an emergency? A flapless circuit, a low-level circuit, and any others that your type might need. Spend time learning your aircraft's less glamorous flying characteristics, particularly if they're a bit nasty. Regularly practice stalls and stall recovery in different configurations so that you learn those vital clues and the recovery actions become instinctive. When flying to a runway that is longer than you need, why not add a little speed above your normal landing speed, particularly if the wind there is a little unpredictable. It gives you a bit more of a safety margin. And of course, be careful out there. So, like Carl Horton's experience at Oshkosh that we heard about on the last APG show, try to make sure you are just the one watching, not in the driving seat.
Good advice, as always, Captain Nick. And well done piece as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. The aerodynamics of death. Aptly named, yeah. People ask, well, how do you make the airplane go up? Well, you pull back on the stick. And then how do you make it go down? You keep pulling back on the stick.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Oh, that's good. All right. Any other comments before we move on?
No, I don't think so.
All right. I think you
Just
said
as a
enough.
great story, as
Yes.
always.
Yes. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that, especially in general aviation, they see a lot. It's easy to kind of get distracted and not pay attention to your speed and your energy situation. And it can even happen sometimes in the commercial airline world, unfortunately.
For sure. But, I mean, we have protections at the yin-yang. But, I mean, when you're flying, the whole point about flying a light aircraft is to enjoy it and experience the, and develop your handling skills. So, you really need to learn to listen to your airplane. And some aircraft just have that way of talking to you with buffet and with sounds and with the feeling of the stick in your hand. So, you really do. If you're not flying enough to learn to recognize those signs easily, then you're making a rod for your own back. That's the sort of pilot that's going to end up in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I always do when I'm flying with my cousin who flies small Cessnas, and if I get the opportunity and we've got the time and the practice airfield is open, I always ask him if we can do both a power on and a power off stall so I can understand that feeling and see what happens and experience it. And, it's sad that so many non-pilots, and I'm very fortunate that people don't get to experience that and feel that and have that opportunity. I wish that when Al took Matt flying, that he would have been able to do that for him, so that Matt could see how truly safe it is when an experienced pilot goes through something like that.
Absolutely.
Oh, Captain Al, I muted you, so you're going to have to unmute yourself while we were listening to Plain Tales. Let's see. If you hover toward the top of your picture there, I think you'll see a mute or anti-mute button. I'm trying to unmute you myself, but I can't seem to do that.
Oh, a technical moment? Surely not.
Yeah. So anybody who's used to using the
You just need to move your cursor.
He's using an iPad, I think.
Oh.
How do you do it in an iPad? I've
Let's have a quick look.
Like fatally muted Al.
Well, that's no bad thing, is it? No.
How's your sign language, Al? I know you know one sign. Don't use that one.
Well, I'm glad he's smiling. He's obviously thinking this is an amusing.
We don't need the Hawaiian single finger salute right now.
There must be some way to unmute yourself. Somebody help Al, please.
When we wanted to do this at Farnborough, we weren't able to.
Uh-huh.
But I could have just taken the XLR out of his microphone, couldn't I?
Well, Nev had the power to do it.
Just actually, as Al is unable to speak at the moment, I can say something without him coming back to me. So I'll do that right now. And a couple of weeks ago, he took me up in his PA-28, which was a fantastic experience for me. And only the second time I'd been in a general aviation aircraft. And Al is really the consummate pilot, and quite windy that day as well.
Al was quite windy then?
Yes, that was before. Then there was some atmospheric conditions afterwards. But really,
So he's a consummate and very quiet pilot by the looks of it.
Yes, that's right. But I could also imagine, too, in a light aircraft for the inexperienced pilot, how one could get overloaded, and not listening as you were saying, Nick, to your equipment, as it were, and just not really, not really. It's very easy to what do you call it? Get behind the aircraft. You've got the aircraft in front of you, as it were, in terms of the timing of things and where you are in the picture.
Oh, for sure. That's a very good description of when you become overloaded. In other words, you're not thinking ahead of the aircraft's ahead of you. In other words, it's going to places you haven't actually worked out where
Yeah.
they are yet.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, Al. Are you back?
I don't think so.
Yes, you
got
are.
it. We can hear you now.
I am. All right, I'm back. Am I?
Unfortunately,
Whatever you did.
Am I still with you?
You are, yes.
Okay, perfect. That
I'm
took a
sorry.
bit of effort.
I thought I could mute you and then unmute you, but apparently I can. It only goes one way.
Yeah, and it took quite a lot of finding. I had to use my Hawaiian one-finger salute quite a lot on the pad. So I'm back.
Whatever it was you did, remember it.
I can relax now.
Now you can defend yourself.
Yeah, well, it was very kind of Nev to say those kind words. We had good fun that day. It was a nice day. The idea had been, just a slight digression. The idea had been for me to fly down to the airfield near to where Nev lives, pick him up, and then fly him out into the middle of nowhere where the plain talking UK guys live. But unfortunately, the weather was pretty dreadful where Nev lived, and it was just not viable. Too many thunderstorms and the like. So the decision was made that I would go direct to the end of nowhere, and Nev would drive. But I managed to get him up for a few minutes that weekend, which was good fun. I was trying to say earlier, but I was kind of cut off before my prime had even changed, that Nick offered some really good advice to general aviation pilots, especially as I know that Nick's not done too much general aviation flying for quite a while. And that is, that advice about when you come back to wherever your home base is to just throw in a couple of practice approaches for the event that you hope doesn't happen. Do a low-level bad weather approach. Practice engine failure in the circuit and just see how it goes. I'm amazed how many of my general aviation friends, the last time they did a practice engine failure was when they did their check ride. You should practice those any opportunity that you can, because it's a skill that needs practice.
Yep, that's exactly the point. Yeah. In the Air Force, we used to have to tick off approaches of all different types, and we actually had to maintain a level of stats. And if we got to the end of the month and we hadn't ticked off enough, the boss used to get really hacked off with us. So we always used to have to try and tag on 4 or 5 circuits at the end of a trip, and used to work right down to the minimum fuel, practicing different approaches and doing different handling techniques. So I would recommend it to anyone who wants to keep themselves alive. Flying is great fun. It's lovely, but it has a downside, and you can't afford to make any mistakes really, because particularly when you're close to the ground, we know the consequences can be very serious.
Make the mistakes, so to speak, when you're practicing, not when you're having to use those skills for real.
For sure. Absolutely, Al. Yeah, I agree.
Great advice. Captain Ollie writes, playing devil's advocate, I agree we need to fly aircraft, but airlines' just culture needs to be a solid institution so that people can practice and relearn the skills that they need to without having the fear of repercussions and punitive action. My company is proactive regarding hand flying in theory, and also over the last 3 years has allocated a period in the sim every 6 months to practice this. But still, we have people that aren't aware of attitude and thrust. The scary thing is that we fly on average 18 sectors over 5 days. How can long-haul pilots even pretend to be proficient? As I said, I'm playing devil's advocate. Great show. Safe flying to you all. Captain Ollie. Well, long-haul pilot, Captain Nick.
Good question. I think the answer is that when you've got enough hours under your belt, you can hopefully go back to those days when you used to be able to do it and pluck the knowledge and the experience and bring it to the fore. So that's one of the reasons I think that to become a good long-haul pilot, you have to have been something else before. You should never go straight into long-haul and make that your only type of flying, because you will never have that experience that you've built up over many years to fall back on. So for me, it was my military flying I fall back on, when, you know, I don't think I ever used an autopilot, certainly not for more than a few minutes at a time. I hand flew for 19 years, and that's what I fall back on.
Second nature.
Absolutely. So that's what you need. And he's at it again. Mute him.
I know. The problem with those little earbud mics is that he can't hear what he's sending to us.
Is that right? Okay, yeah.
No,
I'm really sorry, guys.
I'm a bit disappointed that Ollie's finding that guys flying that number of sectors every day aren't actually, or are finding trouble with the basics, because that's exactly the way you should be building up your basic skills. Flying lots of sectors, getting lots of handling practice. That should be the way that you generate it. And I'm a bit concerned that there's something very wrong with some of his pilots' understanding of how airplanes work.
Mm-hmm.
They are making errors of this nature.
You know, I don't think
I don't understand.
I don't think that it's a small thing in the Air France 447 loss of control and subsequent crash in 2009 that the pilot in command at the time, or the pilot at the controls, pilot flying at the time when the autopilot system and autothrust system shut off, was the least experienced pilot with 3,000 hours total up in that airplane. And who knows, I don't know what his background was, if that's all he ever did was that kind of long haul flying or what. But I have no doubt that somebody like you, Captain Nick, who has, 19 plus years of hand flying high performance airplanes in the military, even though you haven't done that for, I don't know, decades, that you still have that ingrained within you, that it's just something, that experience is just something that you have, and I have no doubt that you still understand aerodynamics and fundamentals of flying.
Well, I mean, I think that's right, because it does get built into your system and it becomes instinctive, and you draw on it, and that's what I think what every long-haul pilot does, who doesn't get to fly a lot of sectors.
But what about those airlines out there that do nothing but long-haul flying, and they're ending up with people that are going through the programs, the ab initio programs and the cadet programs, that really don't have a lot of experience? That's the thing that kind of concerns me.
It concerns me too, and I don't have an answer for that.
Well, thanks, Captain Ollie, for flustering us on that question. Okay, let's see. Let's keep moving on. I think we have time for some more. How about some audio feedback from our good friend Jim Howard?
What happened was the navigator would hear the command, pull his handle, and as he started to leave the aircraft, the pilot would, if he mistimed it, would pull his handle, and his canopy would kill the navigator as he left the aircraft, because the pilot's canopy would jettison and hit him smack in the face. Well, just a navigator.
Hi, APG community and cockpit crew. This is Jim, just a navigator, Howard, in Texas. I just wanted to comment on APG 235, Airline Pilot Guide, the movie. I was really fascinated by Captain Nick's discussion of flying F4s with no sequenced ejection. I don't know, did you pay like 3 magic beans for that? Because I can't understand why you would not have an F4 with a command system. For those of you who haven't had the happiness of being a godlike F4 pilot, which some of my Royal Air Force friends refer to as members of the double-breasted master race. But even if you're just a navigator, you really do like to not die, even if nobody else cares. All the F4s I flew, including some of the very oldest ones in the inventory, F4Cs that survived the Vietnam War, we always had this command select system. I don't know if you guys had that or not, but basically in the back seat where just the navigator had a valve. It was a yellow T-handle, and if it was vertical, then I, as just a navigator, could just eject whenever I wanted. if the guy me off because he said, hey, you're just a navigator or something like that, I could just eject, and he would still have the airplane. He could fly wherever he wanted, and if he could find it, and I would just walk back to the bar and buy a round of beer for the gang because he would stay in the airplane. I could rotate the handle, the yellow T handle, to the horizontal position, and then if I ejected, then he would go first, and then I believe, is that right? No, I would go first, and then he would go, a half a second later. So we would both be down. And this, actually, all kidding aside, this is a serious question, Captain Nick. I never said to any of my pilots that I vastly prefer to fly with that command selector valve closed so that I could just eject whenever I wanted and not worry about breaking the pilot's back or, upsetting him or, destroying his karma or anything. So I just wondered if you guys ever had the command selector valve in your F-Force, and if so, how did you brief the just navigators to set it? My only rule was I would only set it one way. I had a couple of pilots say, well, rotate it for takeoff and close it en route and rotate it during this and close it during that. And I would say, no, I'm sorry, I can't remember all that. I'm happy to fly with it closed or open. I'll go by myself or I'll take you with me. It's up to you. So how did you guys do it?
Nick? What's funny about that is when you were he had that little clip of the previous show, last show actually, and you were saying something about the ejecting the navigator, and I made the little comment that I didn't think anybody heard. I said, well, he's just a navigator. Of course, I was being very but apparently Jim picked right up on that.
Absolutely. Well, he's got those navigator ears, they're big flappy things, He's always listening for insults. Not that he ever has to listen normally, because they come furious, fast and furious. Jim, it's lovely to hear. If I closed my eyes, you didn't need to tell me you were a navigator. I could just tell by the way you spoke. It's just absolutely perfect. And thank you very much indeed for those questions. The answer to it was that the early days, the Phantom that we flew, I don't know about the American ones, but Martin Baker hadn't devised a command eject system for them. It was all independent. When they worked it out, they retrofitted it to our aircraft, so we had a very similar system to yours. I don't know about the early ones. Even if you flew early models, was it a retrofit, or did they originally come out with command eject? I don't know. I'd be quite interested to know if anyone knows for sure. And as regards how we set it up, well, typified really by a few incidents that we had on our base. We had 3 ejections in very short time during takeoff within a few months of each other, and in each case the navigator went out on his own because he decided the guy in the front had lost control, and so he went, well, I'm out of here. And subsequently the pilots managed to get airborne all 3 times from off the grass, which was quite interesting. And they completed a successful circuit and landed the airplane solo. Well, at least, without a navigator in the back, just a hole and a big rod sticking out. To be truthful, that was a problem with the nose steering that used to occur, and some guys left the runway at high speed and navigators chose to step over the side. So generally speaking, we had it set so that the pilot, if the pilot went, everyone went. If the navigator went, he went on his own. And we, like the God-given people we are, the two-wing master race, we carried on and saved the day and brought the aircraft successfully home. So that was the way we generally set it up. For myself, I used to brief that if I was conscious and trying to control the airplane, then we would, generally speaking, have it so that the navigator could eject independently. But if I was unconscious, then would he kindly please turn the knob and take me out with him. Thanks very much.
Yeah, somebody please take Captain Nick out.
Hey, kind.
Well, he has some more feedback. This
no, really?
The Sully movie, yeah.
Speaking of movies, my flying club just got to see a preview of the Sully movie about Sullenberger, Miracle on the Hudson. It's a pretty good movie. The only thing I didn't like about it was he has a flashback to when he was in an F-4, and he had a flight control malfunction. I think it was probably the one, and Captain Nick may remember this better than me because he's a member of the dual-breasted master race, that you could wind up with one hydraulic system and you only had like one spoiler to control roll, and the gear had to be blown down. There was no anti-skid. But anyway, whatever it was, he's got a flight control malfunction, and according to the names on the canopy, it's Captain Sully in the back and Captain Just a Navigator in the back in the pit. Excuse me, Captain Sully in the front, and Just a Navigator, Captain Just a Navigator in the back. And Just a Navigator is like crying back there, saying like, "Sir, sir, oh no, we're all going to die, sir, sir." And he's putting everything he says into a sir sandwich, i.e. a sentence that starts with sir and ends with sir. And even if you're only a navigator and the guy in front was the same rank as you didn't call him sir. You know, you called him, "Hey, bozo," or "Hey, sky god," or something else, but you didn't call him sir. Other than that, the movie was great. It's very technically accurate. It gives the first officer an important role, which I think Sullenberger would have felt the same way. If you like Tom Hanks, if you like aviation, if you like New York City, it's a must-see movie. I'm not sure how to play with the general public, though, but as for people, anybody listening to your podcast, is going to want to see it. And believe me, it's not like that movie about rolling the DC-9 inverted so that you can crash nicely because you're drunk. It's not like that one at all. It's a really good professional movie. There's some hokey kind of, enhanced conflicts to keep the drama going. And it's not that long a movie. They crammed as much as they could into a 128-second event. But it's highly recommended, at least by this Just a Navigator.
Well, thank you, Just a Navigator Jim Howard, for that sneak preview of Sully and your opinion of it. Sounds like a pretty good, kind of a mostly thumbs up interview. I mean,
film review.
Thank you. Review. That's the word I was looking for. Review. We should do a game show. Anyway, so I look forward. Yeah, I have some game show music that we can play. It might be fun, actually. Anyway, moving on. One last part 3 of Jim's great audio feedback.
Last thing is about royal things in the UK. I had the privilege of working with all 3 major branches of the British military when I was stationed in the UK. And I worked with the Royal Navy. I spent 6 weeks with them on HMS Dryad, which is a base. It's not a ship, but they played like it was. I spent a lot of time at RF Cranwell because I would teach classes on electronic warfare or give briefings on the EF-111. So I spent time with the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, and I also spent some time with the British Army because the British Army is not royal. It contains within it a Royal Artillery, and there are certain units of it that are royal, but the British Army itself is, as far as I know, just the Army. They missed out on the royal train, at least as a group. The last thing I'd say is some of the military units in the British system are the Queen's Own fighter squadron, or the Queen's Own regiment. So when President Trump is elected, I'm going to suggest to him that he declare the District of Columbia National Guard as the President's Own fighter squadron. I think that would just be so cool. So, all kidding aside, I love my pilots. I loved all my pilots. I love the Royal Navy front and back seaters that I got to go with, and the Royal Air Force front and back seaters I got to talk to. And I love the show, so keep up the good work. This is Jim, Just a Navigator in Texas.
That was great feedback, Jim. I really like that. And at Cranwell, you must have been on the air warfare establishment. So that's pretty high-powered stuff, and I spent some time taking classes there. So I don't know. I don't suppose we ever came across each other, but yeah, great to hear that. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Jim. And I had a little exchange with him afterwards because I thought, because he kept referring to himself as Just a Navigator, I had to make sure that he wasn't really offended. And he goes, "No, I was just playing." You pilots, you're all jerks anyway. His response.
Right, too.
Hey, before we end the show today, I want to make sure we get to this one because we have a couple of Airbus pilots on board. This is from David. Let's see, David Powell, and he writes, wanted to bring to your attention 2 reports, both from incidents on the same day and with the same operator. And then he gave us links to a couple AAIB investigations. And he said, perhaps you could discuss some of the background as to how these mistakes can happen and how you train to avoid them. And he said, I'm sure that there would have been some interesting cockpit conversation once the plane was on the ground. As ever, love the show and hope the sun shines, the wind's calm, and the rain stays away. Thank you, David. I hope so, too. So one of the links that he sent was to an AAIB, Accidents Investigation Branch report, Airbus A319 on August, actually it occurred in February 16th of this year. And this is what happened. After liftoff, the co-pilot retracted the flap instead of the landing gear. The commander lowered the nose attitude and selected toga thrust, but the GPWS Mode 3 oral alert, don't sink, was triggered before the aircraft recovered to climbing flight. And the other one, again, as he notes, happened on the same day, different place though, same airline, from Amsterdam's Schiphol airport. After liftoff, the commander retracted the flap instead of the landing gear. Realizing his mistake, he immediately returned the flap lever to its previous position, and the aircraft continued to climb without further incident. So it sounds like this one, they didn't get the oral warning, don't sink, don't sink. So what is it about the ergonomics of the 3 Series, Captain Allen? Maybe the big bus as well. I'm not sure if they're that similar or if the ergonomics come into play, but is that a common thing to mistake the flap handle for the gear handle on that airplane?
The ergonomics are such that they are in very different locations. As you might expect, they're a different shape. So the undercarriage handle has a round contour to it, and the flaps are a much more square, looking like a flap, as it were. And from what I understand from my colleagues who work in our technical pilot department, and they go to the Airbus symposiums that happen on a regular basis, this seems to be a very common problem across a lot of operators in various parts of the world. Now, I would hazard a guess that it's not a problem unique to Airbus. It just seems to be something that has become very prevalent in the industry. And truthfully, the experts don't know why. The handles are completely different in completely different locations, and this just seems to be a human factors problem and not actually an aircraft problem. Now, of course, some people will say, well, the two subjects are interlinked, but the designers have done everything that they possibly can to make the risk of confusion as small as possible. So I don't know if Nick has any info to suggest that this has happened at Acme Red, but it's certainly happened on quite a few Airbus operators. And we are still trying to work out why these are happening all too frequently. And it just seems to be that it's either sort of momentary lapses, or there have been unique circumstances that have led up to them, such that, say, for example, in a case that I'm familiar with, the aeroplane was on the ground and having some issues with flaps and slats. So whilst it was on the ground with the engineers on board, the flaps and slats were extended and retracted and extended and retracted innumerable times. The problem was fixed. And then when the aeroplane got into the air, almost by sort of motor memory, the captain selected flaps instead of gear. Now, this wasn't a factor in the 2 incidents that have happened to this British operator, indeed, on the same day. But it just seems to be that there is a problem, and the experts are still trying to evaluate as to whether this is an industry-wide problem or an Airbus-specific problem, but there would appear to be no logic as to why. What are your thoughts, Nick?
Well, I don't think this is just an Airbus problem. This is a problem that's been in the industry for many, many years. I remember reading a report of a Trident captain, and for him it was a cognitive failure, and that's the term used when you move the wrong knob, as it were. His first officer called rotate, and he reached down and put the parking brake on. Seriously. And he burst all the tires on the Trident as he got airborne, and he still he said, I have no idea why I did it. You know, the first officer said one thing, and I did something completely different, inappropriate. What happens is there are certain actions your brain does thinking about it. And there are certain actions that if you repeat continuously get consigned to a part of your brain where they become autonomic. That's the word. So it's sort of like driving a car. You must have been in a car for some length of time, and you suddenly think back to a journey that's been going perhaps for 20 minutes, and you can't remember driving for the last 10 minutes. Mind has been somewhere completely different. You've been thinking about something not involved in driving, but yet you successfully steered a 2-ton machine for 10 minutes without apparently being conscious of it. And it's the same sort of action. So when you have these repetitive actions that we do in the cockpit and reach over and move levers and knobs and regularly, all day, every working day of your life, sometimes you can consign those movements to a part of your brain that does them automatically, and if you are thinking of the wrong thing in your head and your brain just triggers a system and you're not actively monitoring what you're doing, you're just letting your brain's motor actions do a familiar movement, that's when you'll grab the wrong lever and you'll move it in the wrong position. For us, it's on my aircraft fleets, it's common when we do a departure at a rather odd airfield, for example, say Johannesburg, where we frequently use a slightly different flap setting, and because the airfield's very high and hot, it takes a long time to accelerate to the point at which we start raising those flaps. And the cadence of the movements you make are wrong, and you're in the wrong flap setting. So when you get to the point at which you'd normally move the flap up one slot, you don't do anything because it's already up one slot because you've used a different flap setting. But the number of pilots that see it happen and call it, and then the other guy even moves it, so you've both made a mistake, are quite common, and you really have to be careful. And when you get to those situations, you have to make specific briefs so that you are both aware of exactly what's going on. And that's about the only explanation. And the only thing you can do to guard against that is when you get to the point where you're a little bit tired and your body's starting to do things, you're perhaps reading checklists without reading them, you're doing them almost from memory, and you're starting to move controls in the cockpit without thinking too much about it. You're just doing what you do all every day. That's the time to try and click out of it and go, yes, I must make sure I do it, and either slow down, just do something to break away from that autonomic, that natural sort of, oh yeah, I've got to move something, let's grab something and move it, and really think, double check, perhaps put your hand on the lever, pause for a second, have I got the right lever? Yes, I have, now I'll move it. And that's all you can do is and be really conscientious about making the right calls and making the right
That's
movements.
exactly what we've done at Royal Jet, is to when pilot flying calls for gear up, you put your hand on the gear selector, you pause, reflect on what you're about to do, and then if you're happy that you're doing the right thing, then you make the action, because there is no rush to retract the undercarriage, there is no rush to retract the flaps and slats. So these normal events can be done in a slow time and a correct time.
Do you think that when I was just trying to think of why people might do this, why people might attempt a flap retraction rather than a gear retraction. I think perhaps it's when you're rehearsing it in your mind as you're bowling down the runway at 120 knots or a bit more than that, and you're thinking about the next thing that you're going to do, and instead of thinking about exactly the next thing you're going to do, your mind is actually slightly ahead of where the reality is. And it's a bit like reading a book sometimes, and you hear newsreaders doing this with their scripts sometimes, and Micah can relate to this, I'm sure, where they actually read slightly ahead, and in fact they end up saying the word that is in the next sentence rather than the sentence that they are in. And I'm just wondering perhaps whether that, again, apart from what Nick and Al have said, maybe that could play a part in it.
I'm sure there's an element of that, Nev, because I've done that myself. I've been going down the runway rehearsing how I would conduct a stop, abort that runway, that takeoff should it happen, and it's something I regularly do when I'm approaching. But I was doing it actually as we were rolling down the runway, and when the guy, when we got to the 100 knot call, that's right. Instead of calling 100 knots, I called go, which was the point I got to in my rehearsal. It was a good job I didn't call stop, wasn't it? Because that would have been really embarrassing. But I said, go. Oh, sorry, 100 knots. and he looked at me going, what the fuck? That's right. What are you doing? So I had to, when we got airborne, I had to explain that I just, verbalized something I was practicing in my head. And yes, exactly right. We really need to be in the moment, not thinking. You have times when you think things through and prepare yourself, but when you're actually doing something, you need to be in the moment, not letting your mind drift.
Isn't experience funny? Because Nick's just told a story there that I can relate to, because exactly the same thing has happened to me, and I now don't rehearse the abandon scenario whilst going down the runway for this very reason. Because exactly that. The first officer called 100 knots and I called go. So yeah, there are many lessons to be learned from experience.
Absolutely.
And I can't help but think that in these instances and others like them, that fatigue does play a big part of it.
Absolutely. The operator in the UK that had these two instances on the same day has some fairly well documented issues amongst their pilot workforce with regards to fatigue. So I have no doubt that, and Jeff, you're very familiar with sort of early morning departures and just how that sort of effect of, early morning departures, fatigue and monotony can, sort of really play a huge factor in these type of events.
And even though the gear lever and the flap lever is usually placed a considerable distance away, so it's not easy to make the mistake of grabbing the wrong one. I think another factor there is that in the sequence of things, it's always on takeoff, landing gear, flaps. At a certain point, there's some space in between those two actions, but you're using both of those or moving both of those levers in a certain sequence pretty closely to each other. So even though they're physically apart, in your mind, you know that in the next minute you're going to be moving the gear lever up, and then you're going to be moving the flap lever up a notch or whatever. So I think that's probably part of it as well. I mean, they could be in completely opposite sides of the cockpit and maybe still make this kind of mistake.
Absolutely, and I've also noticed that some of the guys that I fly with, not particularly with the movement of these controls, but with other selections, or certainly when entering data into the FMS via the McDo on my airplane, there's almost like a desire to be really slick and quick, and actually there's a lot to be said for being slow and thoughtful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow.
I'm sure your wife would agree with that, Al.
Yeah, well, when you see her next, just, let us know that she can still come back anytime she wants. She handles disappointment well.
The wife of an airline pilot. God bless them. Okay, Frick writes, he sent a link to this story. I don't know if you heard about this you probably didn't in the UK, but in the US they played this on all the major news outlets. Just a couple of days ago, a JetBlue It was a couple different flights, actually. So let me just read this. It's unimaginably stressful having to fly your child without your parental presence with them. Placing your trust in the airline to safely transport your unaccompanied minor is a daunting, risky task. For Maribel Martinez, it was a total nightmare. Martinez traveled to JFK Airport in New York on August 17th, expecting to be greeted by her 5-year-old son, Andy, who was returning from a family visit in the Dominican Republic. The heartwarming reunion soon turned sour and panic-driven when she was presented with another 5-year-old boy who was not her son. Instead of arriving to New York, Andy ended up in Boston, 214 miles away from his home. The fault for the child mix-up lies with JetBlue, which confused Martinez's son with another boy of the same age. Thankfully, after a worrisome and frantic phone call to her son, Martinez was reunited with her son when he was placed on another JetBlue flight to New York that same day. After refunding her the ticket, giving her $2,100 credit for the mishap, JetBlue released the following statement. Well, they basically said, hey, we screwed up.
They said, whoops.
Yeah, and I don't know if your airlines do the transportation of unaccompanied minors? Does yours Royal Jet and
Royal Jet doesn't, although when I worked for a previous airline, we used to have unaccompanied minors. And I know the cabin crew would be delighted when they got the news that they were having an UMIN on board. And even more so on the one occasion where it happened, where unfortunately we went tech and the delegated cabin crew member had to be the babysitter for the night as the rest of the crew went out.
Yeah, we have them, Jeff. There were times when, during busy times, particularly at places like Hong Kong and Dubai, when you get an awful lot of kids traveling because they've been at home or in the UK in boarding school, and you get dozens of them. And we actually used to employ aunties whose job was to look after sort of 6 or 8 at a go and try and keep them under control.
Right.
But we do get out. I don't think we've ever swapped any, though. I don't think so.
I think at my company it has happened in the past, and they have learned their mistakes. And usually it's sometimes it's the airline's fault itself, and sometimes it's the company with which they contract to do that kind of service for us once we've reached the destination. But a lot of people in the chat room are saying, "Oh, I can't believe putting your 5-year-old child by himself or herself on an airplane." But and I can't either, actually. But it's something that happens quite often, and you're seeing it more and more these days. And
I have to say, the first time I heard the story, I mean, it's a tragic story and a frightening story for the parents, but my warped sense of humor, I just started laughing. I just cracked up. I saw a Monty Python sketch happening here, and it just really wiped me out.
You're a bad man, Micah. I'm a
very, very bad man.
Of all people, Micah, come on.
But I can also understand how it can happen. I mean, I don't have children. I've never really gotten along very well with children. I mean, I do okay, but all the kids, they look alike to me. How are you gonna? It's like, whoops. Kind of one of those things.
Oh, okay. Here's another one.
Right. There's the sketch. It's right there. But the other thing is that I don't know how many of you listen to Betty in the Sky with a Suitcase. I know that Nick does on occasion, and it's a very fun podcast. And in the past couple of podcasts, she told some great stories about being a flight attendant with unaccompanied minors that is just really worth going back to find, where nobody got hurt, nobody got lost, but just some very, very funny stories. As
far as we know.
Well, at least according to her story.
Actually, I've just remembered a story from my previous airline. We used to have an unaccompanied minor Her name was Sarah, actually, and I think she was around about 8 or 9, and she travelled very regularly with us, and we got to know her quite well. But she always had a wicked sense of humour, and on her flight paperwork that she would be given, which was the key to success for all of this, she would change her name on the paperwork. So when she arrived at Berlin, the agent would come and meet her, and the look on the agent's face, realizing that the girl that she was coming to meet wasn't the girl that she thought it was when this girl got off the aeroplane. And Sarah would play this out, and she'd go, no, my name's Lucy. It says Lucy here. And just this whole thing. And in the end, we had to say to Sarah, look, you can't keep doing this, because someday one of these ground agents is going to have a heart attack. And she has the same sort of warped sense of humor as Micah. She used to find it absolutely hilarious that she would change her name in the middle of the flight. So I've often thought, actually, I wonder what she's doing these days.
Well, and on a serious note,
7 to 10.
Recently, a friend of mine had to. Some friends live in Hong Kong, and they came over here for the summer, and their daughter, who was 13 or 14 years old, goes to summer camp, and they went back home, and she was flying back on her own at 13 or 14, but they arranged for the flight to leave Boston at 1 in the morning. And I mean, that's just not really a good time for an unaccompanied minor to, be traveling down to Boston on her own, whether it be by bus or
No,
train
that's
or
fine.
whatever.
She could go straight from the nightclub to the airport and board the aeroplane.
So it became a really big deal as to how we were going to get this friend of ours into Boston, but and then they had to accompany her all the way into the gate, and I thought that got a little crazy. Once you're 13, I think you're pretty well set. If you're a good traveler, you can.
You should see some of these unaccompanied minors that we carry. That, I mean, they are like, no way. There's no. They look like they're adults. Some of them.
That was the issue with Betty in the Sky with a Suitcase.
Actually, with the previous airline I worked for, when they turn 12, they become YPs, young persons. Mm-hmm. So they then had the option as to whether they required escorting or not as a young person. But just as another little story about unaccompanied minors, at my previous airline, when you were trying to travel standby and trying to improve your onload chances, you could tap away into the booking system, and you could change your status to an unmin. And of course, you can't offload an unmin, an unaccompanied minor. So you had the highest onload priority that there is in the world.
And you could get away with that?
I tried it once or twice, got some strange looks, thought I wouldn't push my luck too much.
Wow. I think if we were able to do that, we'd get fired.
Well. What do you got to do? What you have to do to get that on-load priority, don't you?
Yeah, you got to have priorities. Wow. Well, it's been a great show. Thanks so much, and in great part to our special guest hosts, Captain Al.
Absolutely.
From Royal Jet, and Micah, our main man up in the beautiful state of Maine in the U.S. of A., and Neville from NevTech, or eviltech.com, over in the UK as well. No, it's always good to see and hear from Nev. And by the way, thanks again for doing that great meetup video and audio coverage of the meetup over there in Amsterdam.
Oh yeah, enjoyed that. That was great. It was a lot of fun and all very impromptu. But yes, very happy to do it, and a lot of help from Myla, Masha, Stuart, and Fabian as well. So really good.
And speaking of meetups, I'd just like to say hello to Nelson, who I met up with in Lisbon on Sunday. We had a micro meetup whilst I was in the queue for check-in, desperately trying to improve my on-load chances traveling standby. And Nelson was quite disappointed that I wasn't able to just go to the head of the queue and say, "Captain, coming through." So I had to sort of shatter that illusion that, when you're traveling standby, you go to the bottom of the heap.
I mean, you didn't say, "Do you know who I am?"
Well,
Yeah,
we get into
that's
that. We
yeah.
get the PA then as saying, "There's a gentleman here who doesn't know
doesn't
who
know
he
who
is."
they are. Does anybody know who this guy is?
Yeah. So I'd like to thank Nelson for the beer that he bought me. That was very, very kind. And I'm not sure if my dad's going to get the opportunity to listen, but he's taking part in the World Air Rally Championships, representing the United Kingdom at the moment in Portugal. So wish him good luck.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Mazel tov.
Brilliant.
definitely.
And I thought you were going to say tonight, Jeff, and playing the part of Dr. Steph is, and playing the part of Rick.
with a gray beard and a nice mustache. We have. So if you haven't heard enough of our main man Micah, you can hear him also on Airplane Geeks, another great aviation podcast. So,
On occasion.
On occasion.
Actually, I think I'll have a piece out tomorrow. Or
okay, great.
Wednesday of this week. Yeah, a new piece.
Look forward to hearing that. And also, if you listen to the Tech Guy syndicated radio show, occasionally you'll hear Mike from Maine on the show. That's Micah.
Yeah, they don't quite get it, It's an unusual name. That's fine. Call me Mike. Just don't call me late for dinner.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, so if you want to learn more about the show, I mean, if you haven't been completely put off by this episode, you can head over to airlinepilotguy.com, and there you'll find all of our podcasts and information about the APG crew, the APG community. You can contact us with feedback there, learn more about the Coffee Fund, and more. So again, that's airlinepilotguy.com. Also, we have some apps available for your Android and iOS devices. Again, you can learn about that by looking at the show notes and also by heading over to airlinepilotguy.com. We do this on YouTube live, so you can. Each episode is recorded with video, so you can see us fooling around while we record the show on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/airlinepilotguy. You guessed it. On social media at APG Crew. That's our group, the APG Crew group Twitter ID, and we also have our individual Twitter IDs as well, and Facebook finally, airlinepilotguy.com. Not finally, /airlinepilotguy. We also have a Slack perpetual chat room, and if you're interested in hanging out there, please contact Hillel via Twitter, and his Twitter ID, his Twitter handle is @Hillel, but don't use L's. He doesn't like them. He likes ones. So it's HI11E1. Again, contact him via Twitter, and he'll give you information about how you can join us on Slack.
And one more thing, Jeff, just before we go, I just want to make sure, is there somebody here with us this evening that has a birthday coming up at the end of the week?
Well, I don't know. Is there somebody that might be celebrating a birthday soon? Maybe one Captain Nick?
Jab, possibly.
Well, that deserves the singing of that now no longer copyrighted tune, Happy Birthday. So happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Captain Nick.
Happy birthday
to you. In full latency fidelity.
Yeah, absolutely. 1, 2, 3. Full part awful.
He's in his latent years, right?
That's very kind. In 3 days, I will
He's
have...
in his latex years.
Very good. In 3 days, I will have 3 years left before I retire. So that'll go.
Oh, we have another APG... Happy birthday, Nick. And another APG community member in the chat room, Jennifer. She has her birthday. She's celebrating it on Monday. It's not on Monday. That's just when she's celebrating it.
No. Was she like the Queen? She have 2.
Happy birthday, Jen.
Yes, happy birthday, Jen. We're not going to sing again because I don't think anybody could really stand to hear that again.
No, definitely not.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us in the live chat room. And again, if you want to find more information about the show, send us feedback, etc., head over to airlinepilotguy.com. And let's see, until next time, wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care, and God bless.
Yeah, bye everybody. Cheers.
Toodle pip.
Woohoo!
Bye, everybody.
Was Pip here?
Well, if he
He's
did,
gonna wish he was
tootled.
Pip's a good guy. That's too bad. He must be out there flying somewhere, huh?
Someone has to.
Yeah, I know.
Slack, Curtis, is a service that, or what was, I don't know if you call it a service. It's a platform that it's kind of like, oh, how would you describe it? It's like a forum almost, or
The never-ending
private-
chat room.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't been there recently. I've been so overwhelmed with a lot of different things going on in my life, so I apologize for that, but I do appreciate everybody that is involved over there. Let's see, what else? Yeah, so thanks again for being up so late with us, those of you in the UK, and for taking time out, Captain Nick, from your Barbados.
No problem. It's I'm gonna go down and get some rum punch and what else? Some nice. I'll try and find some nice seafood, I think.
But
I was listening very carefully for the banging on the door, for all the girls.
He worked it out. He to be after a certain time.
Yeah, I have to give them a different room now. It's become so much of a problem now.
I'm sure your first officer is most appreciative of you, passing down the seniority.
Oh, he's an expert Buccaneer pilot, so he never pulls.
Wow. Okay. Well, thanks everyone again for joining us, not only on our panel but also in the chat room. Without you all, we couldn't do this. So
absolutely.
It's time for me to shut everything down as well and try to get some sleep.
Yeah, you've got an early start tomorrow.
I do.
Well, I should think of you as I get called at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I think. Very pleasant.
Yeah, well, I should be home shortly after that. I think we get back around 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, I suppose I have the disadvantage of flying all night.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, well. Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, otherwise we won't get home.
That's right.
I hope they fixed the hole in the runway at Gatwick for you, Nick.
Well, I didn't fall into it on the way out, so yes, I hope they have.
What hole in the runway?
They closed one of the runways. When I say one of the runways, they've only really got one runway. The other one's a pretend runway.
Also, the standby runway is quite a little bit narrower than the regular one, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah, it's a taxiway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
He jokes not. It is indeed a taxiway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. But there you go. So I don't like Gatwick. I mean, it's full of strange things. You've got to pitch up with your suitcase with your own mag tag, which you fill out yourself, and then you sort of plant it through a hole in the wall. I mean, what kind of a service is that? Ah, Lord.
Even the crew members, huh?
Yeah.
Huh.
Is Gatwick more the leisure airport over there as opposed to the business one?
Well, yeah, exactly right. It's the Bucket and Spade Brigade out of Gatwick.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it's kind of the Newark to the JFK, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Yes.
I'm off to Gibraltar the week after next.
Nice.
Whether will we be in Gibraltar or at Malaga, depending on what the weather's like, it will be a good question. But I've not been diverted yet after all these years I've been going there. So
there's always a first.
A lot of people are, though. Yeah, a lot of people I know never quite make it to Gibraltar by air. They go by coach from Malaga.
Very sensible. Try not to smack into the rock.
Yeah.
Yes.
British Airways are doing a very good job at bird killing in Gibraltar. They use their engines for culling the seagulls.
Do, don't they? Yes,
Yeah.
I saw that. We'll have to see. But
Is that a pleasure trip?
It is, yeah. We're just there for 5 days with Mrs. Nev and seeing one of my clients out there too as well. Looking forward to that.
You're just going on a cheap booze and fags run, basically, aren't
yes. And also, well, I mean, you can't put fuel anywhere, but if you were able to, the petrol and diesel is so cheap out there compared to the UK mainland. Very different indeed. But
you fill your suitcase with it when you go out.
Could do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and as long as you see the client, then you can take it all off your taxes, so it works out great.
That's it. Works for me. So, yeah, really interesting approach into Gibraltar. And Mrs. Nev tonight goes, "Well, what are you doing, Nev?" Well, I'm just printing out the approach plates. Just have a look. And she goes, "Well, why are you doing that?" I go, "Well, it's just a bit different, isn't it? I just need to have a look.
I'm an aviation enthusiast. That's why.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
All right.
Drop me the details, Dev, and I'll see if I can tee up that tower visit for you. I can't
Nicely
promise
done.
anything.
No, absolutely. I'll just ping you a note with my arrival dates and when I'm going to be there. So yeah, thank you.
All right.
In fact, you'll be able to do a tower visit everywhere you go, won't you?
Yes, I'm getting the hang of this. I'm looking forward to one or two coming up.
Yeah, it'll be at the Tower of London next time.
Yeah. A lot of people have said that, actually.
Hopeful. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. So again, everybody in the chat room, thanks for hanging out with us. If you're new, welcome to the APG community. I think you'll find everybody warm and inviting and good.
Except for the dead ones, they're quite cold.
Yeah, they're a little cold, but we warm them up. All right. So let me hit the button here. Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.